Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming, chapters 381 through 390 of the previous episode. Despite struggling with the official dialect in Stalactite Mountain, Chan Ping'an eventually manages to find an inn. He decides to stay longer and use his remaining funds to purchase magical treasures for his friends back home, and spends some time practicing his sword techniques on his own. He also frequents the Sword Reverence Pagoda to study the displays. One night, the spirits of Ning Yao's deceased parents appear to Chan in a vision. In a heartfelt conversation, Chan expresses his earnest intentions toward their daughter. Assured by his sincere devotion, they entrust Ning Yao's future to him before peacefully vanishing. Bolstered by this profound encounter, Chan readies himself for the next leg of his journey, boarding the treasure-swallowing whale ship bound for Parasol Leaf Continent. If you're able to, please support me on PayPal to help me stay active. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 381. Over in Old Dragon City. This was especially the case for the Ding clan, one of the largest clans in the city. It was as if they were facing a formidable enemy. This was because a useless descendant from the Ding clan had seemingly killed a young mortal girl in the city. Generally speaking, these kinds of matters wouldn't cause a single ripple. This wasn't to say that one should fully embrace evil if they had done something bad, going as far as to kill others and eliminate all witnesses. Rather, this was because the Ding clan was extremely wealthy and also willing to spend its wealth. If a problem could be solved with money, then it wouldn't be a problem at all, regardless of how large or small the matter was. However, the problem was that the murdered girl had some relationship with Dust Medicinal Shop, a shop owned by the Feng clan. More importantly, someone was truly taking this minor relationship seriously and asking for an explanation. This person was a highly esteemed guest of the Fan clan. Recently, the Ho clan and the Feng clan, who had enjoyed close relationships with the Ding clan for many generations, frequently visited and communicated with the latter. Meanwhile, the Old Dragon City's Fu clan, which had just become linked to the Cloud Forest Zhang clan through marriage, was extremely busy welcoming and farewelling guests. Thus, they had no time to deal with these useless matters. In the Sun clan's ancestral residence, Sun Jiashu had just received a secret letter. Today, the cultivator from Parasol Leaf Sect who had helped the Ding clan recover from the brink of collapse back then returned to Old Dragon City with that woman from the Ding clan. Because he had a respected standing in Parasol Leaf Sect, there was even a nascent tier Earth Immortal among his subordinates. Moreover, he was also an Earth Immortal himself. Thus, almost everyone felt like the conclusion was already foregone. Nowadays, Sun Jiashu had developed a fondness for fishing. He liked to fish in the location where the young boy from the Great Li Empire had fished before. If there weren't any pressing clan matters for him to deal with, Sun Jiashu would always find some time out of his busy schedule to come here and sit for a while. He was slightly hesitant, not knowing whether he should take a gamble or not regarding this matter. If he took a gamble, then how large should his wager be? Sun Jiashu had recently come across a powerful being who came and went without a trace. This person had only said a single sentence, yet he had allowed Sun Jiashu to remove the slight blemish from his mind's realm. Not only that, but Sun Jiashu was even able to improve his mind's realm further. That person had smiled and asked, "Sun Jiashu, how did you decide that you were wrong?" This sentence had been like a Buddhist wake-up call. However, only those with roots of wisdom and enough knowledge could awaken after hearing these wake-up calls. Otherwise, even hundreds upon thousands of wake-up calls would be useless. Sun Jiashu put his fishing rod away and poured all of the fish in the fish basket back into the river. Sun Jiashu ultimately decided against taking a gamble this time. Further above the sea of clouds that lay above Old Dragon City, there was a woman wearing a green dress nimbly jumping around and playing hopscotch. When she landed, splashes of mist and clouds would jump into the air. Sometimes she tossed around a fist-sized colored glaze orb. In the end, she aimed at someplace in the sea of clouds and flew over in a flash. With her arms tightly against her body and her hands tightly against her thighs, she put her legs together and plummeted directly downward toward someplace in Old Dragon City. She was like a green scallion falling from the sky. Her speed was incredible, yet she stopped herself the exact moment before she hit the ground, landing in a slow and graceful manner. She was in the backyard of the Dust Medicinal Shop. Shopkeeper Zheng Dafeng was smoking on the steps. "What are you up to?" Fan Junmao asked. It was difficult to make out Zheng Dafeng's appearance and expression through the wafting smoke, and she could only hear him reply slowly. Those who owe money need to pay money, and those who owe lives need to pay with their lives. I'm not the same as Li Er. He only looks for the old ones while I look for both the young ones and the old ones. There was an amused look in Fan Junmao's eyes as she looked at the man who always used to joke and laugh. Dogs couldn't change their habit of eating shit. So many years had already passed, yet his personality was still the same as always. He was never serious, and it was as if he were always saving his seriousness for that one particular time. In some place extremely far away there were once 4 heavenly gates. 3 of the divine generals guarding them had abandoned their positions for one reason or another, stepping aside and creating a path for the unstoppable rebel army. Only the divine general in the south, the one viewed as the most cowardly and goofy by everyone, had refused to step aside. He had refused to do so even in the face of death. Of course, the consequence of not stepping aside in the face of death was naturally death. Someone had impaled him to death on the large pillar of the heavenly gate with a single sword strike. Everyone found this inexplicable, regardless of whether they were friend or foe. People were genuinely unable to find any reason to explain why the divine general had stubbornly sought death. Fan Junmao sighed in her mind. She truly didn't want to know either, yet it was a shame that she knew exactly why this was. Sage Ruanqiong had officially founded a sect in the large mountain to the west already. Right now, he only had 3 official disciples. The blacksmith sword shop beside the Dragon Whisker River was still open as normal. It didn't shut down, and Ruanqiong tasked a young girl, one of his opening disciples, with looking after the place. She was missing the thumb of her sword-wielding hand, so she went from hanging her sword on her left hip to hanging it on her right hip. She also started to wield her sword using her left hand. When Ruanqiong's only child, Xiuxiu, had moved to Divine Elegance Mountain, it was said that she had brought a cage of chickens with her. She had held it in her hands just like that, causing many immortals to involuntarily look over. They had mistakenly thought that the chickens were some kind of extraordinary spirit beasts. Afterward, some qi refiners who had visited Divine Elegance Mountain after the fact all wanted to laugh when they mentioned this matter. As it turned out, the coop of old hens and young chicks had indeed been nothing more than normal mortal chickens. Thereupon, some immortal sects from the surrounding mountains felt was a case of Ruanqiong maintaining her childlike innocence. In other words, preserving a genuine Tao heart. They were fully serious about this. Thus, some young cultivators who had just moved into the brand new immortal residences also started to contemplate the deeper meaning behind this. They felt like there was profound knowledge to be uncovered. As expected of Xiuxiu. As expected of a prodigious cultivator whom Wind Snow Temple had placed high hopes on. Sure enough, everything she did carried with it a sense of mysticality. Sure enough, her actions all aligned with the great Tao. Long Eyebrows, the young boy with the surname Xia, had found this quite interesting. Thus, he had mentioned it to Sister Xiuxiu as a joke. Ruanqiong had been sitting on a small emerald green bamboo chair at the time, and she had been looking at the arrogant old hen leading a brood of small chicks around and pecking at grains on the ground. She had simply replied, "Is that so?" and said nothing more. Long Eyebrows, a young boy blessed with good fortune and fate, had furrowed his brow while looking at the absent-minded young girl. However, this expression had made his eyebrows appear even longer. Ruanqiong was a cultivator at the unpolished jade tier. He also had Wind Snow Temple as his backer, and his ability to forge swords had made him even more friends. Thus, he was able to use the title of sect for his new force. He called it Dragon Spring Sword Sect. In reality, Ruanqiong had initially wanted to name his force Sword Sect. This name was extremely imposing, and it could stand tall in the world. Firstly, however, a sword sect had already existed in Middle-earth Divine Continent since long ago. Thus, naming his force Sword Sect would have gone against the rules established by the Confucian sages. Secondly, some good friends of Ruanqiong's had privately persuaded him against doing this while visiting to congratulate him. Founding a sect in the Great Li Empire was already a significant move. Indeed, tall trees would naturally catch more wind. With this in mind, it was best not to be too forceful when it came to naming his force. Even though Ruanqiong eventually settled on Dragon Spring Sword Sect, he still felt like something was a little off in his mind. When he entered and exited the mountain, he disliked doing so from the archway where the name of his sect was hanging. Thus, he asked the imperial court of the Great Li Empire to open a small side path for him, relying on the labor of the Lu clan convicts. This led to many discussions and debates, with many people feeling was a bad omen. After all, didn't this signify abandoning the great Tao for a heretical path? However, Ruan Xiao and the 3 opening disciples all understood the reason behind this. Ruan Xiong had left the 4 of them with these words: "Whoever can rightfully remove the characters Dragon Spring from the signboard will become the next sect leader." Right now, the attention on Dragon Spring Sword Sect was unrivaled in the Great Li Empire. Apart from the mountains that the Great Li Empire's Imperial Song clan had gifted Ruan Xiong, as well as the main mountain of his sect, Divine Elegance Mountain, there were also the 3 surrounding mountains that Chan Ping'an was loaning to him for 300 years, Treasured Scripture Mountain, Rainbow Cloud Mountain, and Immortal Herb Mountain. These mountains were part of Dragon Spring Sword Sect's territory as well. This was a good deal. When it came to other people, they might not be able to find the temple even if they brought pig heads to offer. After finding the temple, it would be another difficult task to truly succeed in offering incense. Thus, Chan Ping'an, someone whose cultivation base was barely worth a mention yet was a large landlord in Dragon Spring Prefecture, had truly struck gold with the deal. Not only that, but Wei Bo, the newly appointed formal god of Northern Mountain, had once brought Chan Ping'an around the different mountains in the surrounding area as well. This was another dazzling golden shield for the young boy. According to rumors, his young scholarly attendant and maidservant in Downtrodden Mountain also had peace and safety tablets hanging from their waists now. These were tablets that the Great Li Empire only awarded to chi refiners with great merit. This was another shield. With these 3 shields, the extremely fortunate Chan Ping'an could even walk backward in Dragon Spring Prefecture, to say nothing of walking sideways when. However, it was a shame that the young boy had vanished at some point. It was said that he had left on a long journey. He was most likely someone who didn't understand how to enjoy fortune. One side of Divine Elegance Mountain was a large cliff, one which was extremely steep and with no foothold. There was an ancient engraving of 4 characters that read, "Heaven creates divine elegance." After Ruan Xiong founded his sect, chi refiners would soar through the sky and come here almost every day to admire the elegance of the 4 characters. They felt like Ruan Xiong's choice of Divine Elegance Mountain as the main mountain of his sect was perhaps a profoundly mystical one that pertained to the divine will of the heavens. However, Ruan Xiao never went to the steep cliff to join in on the commotion. She had seemingly never gone there a single time. Ruan Xiao, who wasn't fond of moving, had seemingly grown a little taller and chubbier. Her chin was slightly rounder than before. Ruan Xiong felt was quite good. In reality, fathers in the world probably felt like their daughters were quite good no matter what. Ruan Xiao would occasionally go to the pavilion located on the peak of Divine Elegance Mountain. She would pick a sunny day to stand there and gaze into the distance, looking at those winding streams that eventually converged into the Dragon Whisker River, and then the turbulent Iron Talisman River. Ruan Xiao wasn't fond of looking at these streams and rivers. Quite the opposite in fact, and she felt like they were a massive eyesore. River guardians, river gods, rain gods, cloud guardians, and so on. Ever since a young age, she had disliked these many deities who were related to water. She would feel irritated whenever she heard these titles. She wanted to deal with them the same way she dealt with sword blades that were fresh out of the furnace. She wanted to smash them with a hammer and end them once and for all. Today, Ruan Xiao was yawning as she lazily rested her arms and head on the railings. The soft and choppy sound of footsteps traveled over from beyond the pavilion. Ruan Xiao turned around, and she saw 4 people in Confucian robes walking over from a distance. Ruan Xiao glanced at them, and she was able to recognize all of them. There was Prefectural Overseer Wu Yuan, a young man who was climbing the official ranks fairly quickly. He was the prized disciple of the Great Li Empire's Imperial Preceptor Cui Chan. There was someone with the surname Chao, the current Kiln Supervision official. There was also someone with the surname Yuan. In fact, the surnames Chao and Yuan both belonged to clans of pillar generals. The individuals honored in the Wenchong Pavilion, and the martial sage temple constructed in the Mountain of Porcelain and the Immortal Tomb were none other than the old ancestors of these 2 officials. The final person was an assistant mountain master from Cloud Drape Mountain's Forest Deer Academy. His pseudonym was Chang Shuidong, and he had once been the assistant minister of Yellow Court Nation. In reality, he was not a human, but an old flood dragon. Ruanxiu stood up and walked out of the pavilion. She offered the best spot for enjoying the scenery to the 4 people in Confucian robes. The 4 people exchanged a smile, yet none of them acted too obsequiously toward the young girl. After all, Ruanxiu was a girl by herself right now, so it wouldn't be appropriate for them to act too familiar with her. If it were some other qi refiner, they would definitely thank Ruanxiu at the very least. They might also announce their name and use this opportunity to make acquaintance with the young girl. The 4 people had agreed to come here together to play Go. Wu Yuan wanted to play against Mountain Master Chang. Wu Yuan's master, Cui Chan, was the undisputed #1 Go master in the Great Li Empire. While studying under Cui Chan's tutelage, Wu Yuan's Go skills had advanced in leaps and bounds. Because of this, he was also a renowned Go master in the capital of the empire. Meanwhile, Kiln supervisor Chao and the person with the surname Yuan were simply here to spectate the game. The ancestors of the Chao clan and the Yuan clan were good friends who had been the twin jade pendants of the Great Li Empire. Several hundred years later, however, the relationship between the 2 clans was like the relationship between fire and water. Even though Kiln supervisor Chao and the person with the surname Yuan were sitting opposite each other, they almost never made any eye contact with each other. Now that Great Sui Nation and the Great Li Empire had become allies, with the 2 parties signing pacts on the Great Li Empire's Cloud Drape Mountain and Great Sui Nation's East Mountain, it could be said that the Great Li Empire was dominant in the entire northern region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Including Yellow Court Nation, several vassal states of Great Sui Nation started to change their allegiance to the Great Li Empire, paying tributes to the latter instead of the former. Of course, there were also some slight bumps along the way, as many powerful clans felt was an act of treachery. Thus, the iron hooves of the Great Li Empire's warhorses started to thunder across the land. When the sound of galloping subsided, the heads of many high-ranking officials and renowned individuals had fallen to the ground. The entire Great Sui Nation was caught in an eerie and subdued atmosphere, from the imperial court to the local governments, and from the mountains to the cultivation world. The mighty Great Sui Nation, a powerful nation that was the inheritor of the scholarly lineage, shockingly surrendered without a fight. They ceded territory to seek peace. A renowned scholar fell drunk, climbed a mountain and composing a poem. Before throwing himself off a cliff to commit suicide, he left behind these last words. Since the founding of Great Sui Nation by the Gao clan, when have we scholars suffered such humiliation as today? Only through death can we prove our loyalty and innocence. A Go master from Great Sui Nation who was renowned throughout half of the continent, used his favorite Go table as firewood, burning it to ashes. One after another, many officials resigned from their positions in the capital of the Great Sui Nation. From high-ranking officials in the 6 ministries to low-ranking external officials, more than 100 people resigned from their jobs. It was rumored that the government offices of the 6 ministries in the capital were now half vacant. With little concern for all these things, the warhorses of the Great Li Empire were now starting to march south. Chaos was already taking root in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Over at the pavilion, the crisp sound of stone pieces landing on the Go table occasionally traveled over. Ruanxiu arrived under an old pine tree next to the cliff. While walking here, she had picked up stones from the ground and lightly tossed them down the cliff. Clouds and mist slowly rolled by like the water of large rivers. Heaven and earth were vast and blurry. The young girl suddenly threw away the remaining stones in her hand. I need to help father forge iron today. This is not good. I'm already so late, so I definitely won't get stewed pork with dried bamboo shoots to eat tonight. There was a family of 3 sitting on an intercontinental ship and traveling from south to north. After a long time, they finally arrived at their destination in complete Reed Continent, an immortal sect called the Lion Peak. There was an additional pair of young people with the family now, a master and his servant. The young master was a bookish young man, while his servant was a young scholarly attendant. The latter was helping to lead a horse right now, one that had the officially forged golden and silver saddle unique to the Tail Feather Empire on its back. However, it appeared as if the scholarly attendant was quite unwilling to be here, and his expression was sour the entire time. Yet, He couldn't complain or say anything because his young master was the one who had insisted on leading the way for those people. The family of 3 spoke and acted like country bumpkins, and more importantly, they weren't understanding at all. Even though the extremely crude husband and wife had raised a fairly decent daughter, how could she possibly be worthy of his young master, regardless of how beautiful she was? The Tailfeather Empire was one of the largest empires in complete Reed continent. Even though the emperor's surname was Han, who wasn't aware that half of the officials in the imperial court had the same surname as his young master. Moreover, even though his young master wasn't the only child in the clan, there were only 2 descendants in their generation, the young master and his older brother. However, the older brother was an illegitimate child, while the young master was a direct descendant. Thus, his young master would be wronged even if he were to marry a princess. That being the case, how could he waste his time with an illiterate girl from the wilderness? This was just a family from the measly eastern treasured vile continent, so his young master truly didn't need to be so polite and attentive. The young scholarly attendant was so angry that he almost shed tears several times during their journey. However, his young master would at most console him for a bit before continuing to hurry to the Lion Peak with the family of 3. The master of the Lion Peak was a fairly famous immortal, but what did this matter? He was only a scholarly attendant, a study companion for his young master, yet he had already seen a few elusive terrestrial sword immortal thanks to the influential status of his young master. Even though this young scholarly attendant with extremely high standards had indeed seen many powerful sword immortals before, he was still, in fact, underestimating the power of the Lion Peak's Mountain Master. Even though the Mountain Master was only a 10th tier nascent tier Earth Immortal, Earth Immortals were a very valuable commodity in complete Reed continent. Apart from itinerant immortals willing to lead carefree lives, it was actually very difficult for immortals to gain a solid foothold if they didn't possess some true power or abilities. The Mountain Master of the Lion Peak was a good example of this. He was a genuine outsider, yet he had relied almost solely on his own strength to pummel a sect-level force in the Tailfeather Empire and force them to yield in just 2 short centuries. This was proof enough of his outstanding combat power. Moreover, complete Reed continent was known for producing powerful individuals, strange individuals, unreasonable individuals, as well as individuals who possessed all of these 3 qualities. Thus, forces in complete Reed continent were extremely susceptible to unexpected disasters. There were often powerful cultivators who would target and attack a force simply because they felt like it was an eyesore. They would run away if they were weaker, and they would pulverize the force's main plaque if they were stronger. This was northern complete Reed continent, a continent that had forcefully snatched the prefix northern from pure white continent. There was a culture of toughness, and the entire imperial court promoted martial arts rather than scholarly study. Not only were they good at fighting, but they also enjoyed fighting. In fact, many descendants and disciples from immortal clans and forces liked to leave the mountains to train by themselves. After leaving the mountains, they would purposely disguise themselves as itinerant cultivators or vagrant cultivators, so that they could fight to their heart's content. Here, there was an abundance of sword cultivators. Some top-notch sword practitioners renowned throughout the cultivation world even possessed divine sword skills that allowed them to challenge Earth immortals from the mountains. Due to these reasons, the sages who watched over the 3 Confucian academies in complete Reed continent all had extremely high combat power compared to the Confucian sages in the other continents. As for whether their knowledge was profound, this could take a back seat. After all, they needed to make their audience listen to them first. The current sage of the Great Cormorant Academy was initially a relatively unknown scholar, who largely stayed in the academy without venturing out. In the eyes of native-born cultivators, rulers, and officials in complete Reed continent, this sage was also someone who liked to show off his knowledge. Thus, he wasn't particularly liked. However, cornered rabbits would eventually bite. This sage had been bestowed the words "curb your anger" by his master before setting off from the academy in Middle-earth Divine Continent. Yet in the end there was eventually one time when he was cornered. And he bit. One day someone surprisingly exclaimed in public that this sage's knowledge and virtuous teachings were stale and stinky, like a fart trapped in a small room. While saying this, the person was in very close proximity to the Great Cormorant Academy. Afterward, he swaggered away with a smug expression. Moreover, many immortal clans and forces in complete Reed continent agreed with his accusations. The academy remained silent for a long time. In the end, however, there came a day when the sage left the academy and pummeled 2 nascent tier cultivators as well as an unpolished jade tier cultivator black and blue within the span of 1 month. In all 3 cases, the Confucian sage had continually knocked their heads with his knuckles while loudly asking, "Is it still stale and stinky? Have things been cleared up now?" The 3 people naturally had no option but to reply, "Yes, it's all clear now." Yet, the sage had offered the same response every single time. "You're as clear as fart." This eventually became a widespread joke. Meanwhile, the mountain master of the Lion Peak was one of the rare few earth immortals whom the Confucian sage from the Great Cormorant Academy didn't find an eyesore. However, the measly scholarly attendant was naturally unable to engage with such top-level secrets. When they arrived in front of the mountain gate of the Lion Peak located at the foot of the mountain, the scholarly attendant thought that they should at least go inside for a cup of tea since they had already come here. However, his young master showed his stubbornness again, saying to the couple and their daughter, "Seeing friends off for 1,000 li, all journeys eventually end in farewell." He then turned around to leave. The young scholarly attendant felt so aggrieved that he almost shed tears again. After wandering around for almost half a year in the outside world, it was indeed good to finally return home. However, their trip hadn't been satisfying or impressive at all. When they reached the top of the mountain, the woman quietly chattered with her daughter and offered many of her thoughts. These were nothing more than her opinions on how the wealthy young master was a fairly good person. He was friendly toward others, and his appearance was also very handsome. Compared to the half-baked knowledge of Lin Shuyi and Dong Shuijing, he was seemingly more knowledgeable as well. However, it was a shame that her daughter neither nodded nor shook her head. The woman angrily poked her daughter and scolded her with a smile. "Silly and blockhead girl." The young girl, in fact she probably couldn't be considered a young girl anymore, responded with a soft smile. She had always been, ever since a very young age. She never became angry, and never roared with laughter either. Apart from her little brother Li Huai, she didn't care much about anyone else. The woman often called her a lump of soft dough that anyone could squeeze and bully. When she got married in the future, she would definitely suffer immensely if she didn't change. Of course, the woman's main point was that her daughter would most certainly be unable to run the home and suppress her husband in the future if she remained so soft and malleable. That being the case, how would she help her little brother? The woman never concealed her bias. Fortunately, the woman's husband, the unsophisticated man called Li Er, never favored males over females. He doted on his son and daughter equally. However, it was a pity that he had the lowest status in the family. His opinions were the most worthless. Meanwhile, it was possible that Li Lu was someone who was innately resigned to adversity. Thus, she didn't feel like there was anything wrong with this. This time, the woman was told that the mountain master of this Lion Peak or whatnot had some kind of relationship with her husband's good-for-nothing master. Her husband promised that their family of 3 definitely wouldn't need to worry about food or drink after arriving here. Only after hearing this did the travel-worn woman, who had seen a couple of continents and seas by now, curse old man Yang a little less than she usually did. She felt like there was finally a teeny bit of payoff to Li Er being his disciple for so many years. Otherwise, she would have definitely blocked the door of the medicine shop's backyard every day after returning home. She would have scolded that undying old fart so much that he could never have washed his face anymore. As she walked, the woman involuntarily thought of her son, whom no one was looking after. Indeed, her precious son was definitely tired and suffering hardships right now. The woman immediately became angry, and she pinched her daughter's arm and said, "What's wrong with that young master who has a strange surname? Have you never considered the fact that after marrying him, we won't need to subject ourselves to the whims of the people on this Lion Peak or whatnot? After that young master with the surname Situ brings you home in a sedan carried by 8 men and marries you, we can all move to his place and quickly bring Li Huai over as well. At that time, our family will finally be reunited again." Li Lu smiled, causing her eyebrows to curve slightly. It was as if she were admitting to her mistake and asking for forgiveness, yet at the same time pouting and acting cute to get out of trouble. The woman was weakest against this facial expression. She immediately cooled her anger and pinched Li Lu's arm again. However, she was gentler this time and she scolded, "You heartless girl. Don't you know to care for your little brother? I've raised you for nothing for all these years." The capricious woman started to laugh happily after saying this, and she reached over to pinch her daughter's cheek as she said, "Naughty girl, your appearance truly takes after mine. Just take a look at that beautiful little face. It's so soft and smooth." Li Er, who was carrying a large luggage bag, cracked a wide grin when he heard this. However, there was a hint of sadness in the woman's voice as she continued, "It was very difficult, but we finally made it until the day that the old woman from Apricot Blossom Alley died. That vixen from Clay Vase Alley also moved away. How good would it have been if we didn't need to leave the small town? There was already no one who could beat me in an argument." The woman had been extremely cautious and fearful during the entire journey to the north. She possessed so many masterful skills, yet she felt like she was completely unable to use any of them. It was an utter shame. Li Lu's charming appearance didn't necessarily take after her mother's. However, Li Huai's aggressiveness toward friends and family definitely did. Atop the Lion Peak, the mountain master was accompanying an obese old man who looked like a very wealthy individual. The latter looked spirited and awake, and if he weren't sitting in this place, and his Earth Immortal subordinate standing there in a respectful manner, people would most likely mistake him for a shopkeeper of some small shop in a town outside the mountains. Or perhaps they would mistake him for a wanton and oppressive old squire. There was an emerald green rope tied around the waist of the obese old man, and he clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "Old Man Yang is truly an open-minded and magnanimous person. If it were me, such a loud-mouthed woman would have already reincarnated 1,000 times." The old man beside the obese and wealthy-looking individual appeared dignified and transcendent. His appearance aligned with the impression that commoners had of immortals from the mountains. He didn't respond to his guest's joking remark, and he simply put on a faint and courteous smile. The obese old man smiled with squinted eyes and asked, "Ignoring trash golden courtier cultivators and only focusing on Earth immortals like you, approximately how many have walked out from Jewel's small world in the past 1,000 years? The two of us are allies now, so there's no need to hide something as small as this, right?" The old immortal bowed slightly and replied in an apologetic voice, "Please forgive me, Great Sword Immortal Chow, but I can't say anything regarding this matter." As it turned out, this wealthy-looking individual was none other than Southern World Continent's Sword Immortal Chao Shi. He had come here to act as Li Lu's Dao Guardian, according to the agreement. Why is that Li Lu still unwilling to cultivate? What's the reason behind this?
Cao Si asket?
The old immortal, the mountain master of the Lion Peak, replied in a helpless voice, "You can ask the founder about this yourself." Chao Shi faltered for a moment before remarking, "She's actually the reincarnation of your branch's founder? The Lion Peak's lineage has only existed for a few years, so how did you people manage to find her?" The old immortal hesitated briefly, and it was as if he had received permission from someone. After weighing things up for a short moment, he replied in a careful voice, "We naturally have our secret techniques. Moreover, this isn't limited to just my branch's founder." Chao Shi cut straight to the most important point. "Is Li Lu aware?" The old immortal smiled and didn't say anything. This was already an answer in and of itself. "I've found myself a treasure." Chao Shi clicked his tongue and said in wonder. Afterward, Li Er and his family of 3 settled down in the Lion Peak. They were attended to by an old steward from the peak, supposedly a distant relative of Old Man Yang. He was responsible for attending to the chores in the Lion Peak. After finding a place for the family of 3 to stay, he didn't give them anything to do for the moment. He simply asked them to wait for a few days until the results came out. There were strict rules in the Lion Peak, and people were prohibited from disturbing the esteemed immortals while they were cultivating. One wasn't allowed to wander around either. If they caused any trouble, the old steward would also be unable to help them. The woman had a nagging feeling that these words were targeting her. Thus she couldn't help but feel extremely uneasy. Of course, she naturally didn't know that the elder from the Lion Peak hurriedly wiped the cold sweat from his brows after leaving their room. The mountain master had truly given him a difficult and hair-raising task. In fact, the old man hadn't even dared to take an extra glance at Li Lu. After a few days, the woman was unable to suppress her boredom any longer. She said that she wanted to find something to do in the small town beside the Lion Peak. Hearing this, Li Er borrowed some money from someone and planned to open a shop in the small town. Afterward, some esteemed immortal from the Lion Peak coincidentally discovered Li Lu's cultivation aptitude. Thus, Li Lu stayed in the mountain by herself to cultivate. The woman was a short-sighted person who lacked knowledge, so she always felt like her daughter's greatest fortune would be to marry into a wealthy family. As a result, she was quite displeased with this outcome. After all, what if Li Lu truly became an immortal? She would disappear for years or decades at a time, so how could she still help Li Huai? In the end, however, the woman still followed Li Er to the small town. They rented a house and wandered around to look for a suitable location for their shop. They planned to settle down here. A short while ago, Li Lu had stood at the foot of the mountain and farewelled her parents. After the two of them vanished into the distance, all of the nascent tier and golden core tier cultivators from the Lion Peak, including the mountain master, had appeared behind her and stood there in utmost respect. They hadn't even dared to breathe too loudly. Following the mountain master's lead, they all said in unison, "Welcome back, esteemed founder." Li Lu paid no heed to them. Not allowing anyone to follow her, she ascended the Lion Peak by herself and arrived before a cave that had already been sealed for a long time. She then strode inside. There were layers of restrictions that even Earth immortals would find difficult to break. Yet Li Lu didn't take them seriously at all. Or perhaps it was better to say that they didn't obstruct her at all. When she walked out from the cave again, there was a golden lion seal hanging by her waist. Shi had stood at the entrance and waited for a long time already. There was a short sword that looked more like a dagger in his hand, and he raised his arm with the green rope and chuckled. "Before refining a river to create my bonded flying sword, this short sword accompanied me in battle for 300 years. Afterward, I continued to nurture and accumulate its sword chi. You'll be able to freely wield it once you advance to the middle 5 tiers. You can unleash 10 strikes, and each strike will be powerful enough to rival the full power strike of an unpolished jade tier sword immortal. If you wait until you reach the golden core tier or nascent tier, you can unleash all of the sword chi at once and rival the strike of an immortal tier sword immortal." Li Lu smiled softly and raised a hand, causing the short sword to fly into her palm. She then casually drew the sword and gently slashed downward. A brilliant ray of sword chi roared forward, appearing mighty enough to split open heaven and earth. All of the cultivators of the Lion Peak were stunned into silence. Li Lu, who had mysteriously ascended to the heavens and advanced to the middle 5 tiers in a single step, nodded and replied, "It's just as you said." "Good heavens," Shi sighed with emotion. In a rare situation, Shi remembered his unfilial descendant, Chao Jun. Right now, Chao Jun was mingling with the marching army of the Great Li Empire. Look at other people's children, and then look at my own descendants. How infuriating. Johnshin and Flying Dumpling's thoughts. I wonder what Li Huai's mother's name is. The author really likes using the woman. True Martial Mountain. As one of the 2 ancestral forces of the Militarian sect in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, far more Militarian cultivators from True Martial Mountain joined the army compared to Wind Snow Temple, a force that consisted of many more wandering cultivators. During the past year, more and more cultivators had left the mountain, with half of them heading to the Great Li Empire in the north. Meanwhile, the rest of them had gone to some nations in the central region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent according to their own fated opportunities. Recently, however, the somewhat deserted True Martial Mountain had started to become lively again. Ma Kuxuan, the domineering new member who had only entered the mountain a few years ago, had caused a huge commotion again. He had pummeled a sea observation tier cultivator to death. True Martial Mountain didn't announce the specific reason behind this, but it was certain that no great animosity existed between the two people. The elderly cultivator barely ever interacted with Ma Kuxuan. Even if they did engage in conflict, it would only be verbal battles at most. Thus, it was definitely the cruel and merciless Ma Kuxuan who had purposely attacked to kill. Even though 2 grand elders pleaded the case for Ma Kuxuan, the young boy was still ultimately confined in the Divine Martial Hall located at the back of the mountain. He was prohibited from leaving for an entire year. The past patriarchs and a dozen or so unnamed deities were honored in the Divine Martial Hall. It was said that true Martial Mountain had once encountered a great calamity that threatened severe and wide-ranging consequences. During that critical moment, the sect master of that generation had used an untaught secret technique to summon help from the golden deity statues that had enjoyed incense for thousands of years in the Great Hall. They had left the mountain to kill enemies together, eventually annihilating more than 10 immortal sects in a single go. That had been a magnificent feat, however. Being confined in the divine martial hall definitely wasn't a comfortable experience. Only cultivators who had committed severe crimes in true Martial Mountain would be locked up in this place. In fact, fewer than 1 in 10 people could make it out alive. According to rumors, the deities honored in the divine martial hall would awaken on some ancient fasting days that were no longer observed. During these times they would interrogate, punish, and even consume the souls of cultivators. In an immortal residence in true Martial Mountain that was covered in immortal chi, a military and grand elder of extremely high seniority roared in rage. "Isn't punishing Ma Kuxuan a little too severe?" The old man slammed his hand on the table and shouted. "Ma Kuxuan is the most prodigious talent I've seen in my life. He's a genuine prodigy. I'll never forgive you if you ruin him." The handsome man had just picked up a go piece. When he heard this, he silently placed the go piece back into its box and said with a frown, "There are, in fact, many tragic examples of sects and other such forces being destroyed by some extraordinary disciple." The old man chuckled coldly and replied, "But there are even more examples of a single disciple revitalizing their sect and wiping away all weaknesses and issues." The handsome man shook his head and explained, "When it comes to cultivation, the notion of not doing wrong is the most important thing. Otherwise, if we break all of our ancestral rules for the sake of 1 or 2 people, we'll only end up with an unsupported pagoda in the sky even if we achieve temporary signs of prosperity. In any case, true Martial Mountain is running smoothly at the moment, and we're not in some perilous position where we need someone to save us. Junior brother Liu, hear my advice. You have high hopes for Ma Kuxuan, so at the end of the day, it's your own personal matter if you're willing to give him all of your immortal treasures and even secretly help him obtain that fated opportunity. I won't interfere with these things. After all, they aren't against the rules of true Martial Mountain." The old man looked at the young man, whose expression was becoming increasingly cold. Initially overbearing, the military and grand elder couldn't help but feel a little nervous at this moment. He humped coldly and insisted, "It's worth it for true Martial Mountain to break some rules for Ma Kuxuan. Wind Snow Temple has the divine platforms Wei Jin, but who do we have?" "We have me," the handsome man replied with a faint smile. The old man almost choked upon hearing this. He couldn't find any words for a long time. The handsome man seemingly found the atmosphere too tense for his liking, so he finally smiled and said, "All right, as the saying goes, our descendants will all have their own fortunes. In any case, Ma Kuxuan isn't even your descendant, so what are you so worried about? Are you doing this for the sake of the sect? Who are you trying to dupe? I know your personality best, don't I? At the end of the day, you're simply doing this in the hope that Ma Kuxuan can go to Wind Snow Temple to exact revenge for you in the future." The military and grand elder, who was renowned for his short temper, conceded frankly, "That was indeed my original intention. However, after interacting with him for a while, I'm becoming increasingly fond of Ma Kuxuan. Even 1,000 of my useless descendants aren't as capable as a single Ma Kuxuan." The handsome man concurred with the old man in a rare display, nodding and saying, You indeed shouldn't have given birth to those bastard descendants of yours back then. To put things simply, it's your own fault for not being able to control the buddy in your pants. As the sect leader of true Martial Mountain, don't you feel ashamed to say such things?" The old man fumed. The handsome man smiled and said in amusement, "I heard that your pants became loose again recently? You found yourself a beautiful mortal mistress." The old man's anger instantly subsided, and he replied in a low voice, "I truly like that woman. She's innocent and adorable. Unlike those bullshit celestial maidens from the mountains. Those celestial maidens are truly tiring. As long as you like her," the handsome man replied casually. Fury suddenly welled up inside the old man again, and he suggested, "We genuinely need to fix the atmosphere in true Martial Mountain, especially regarding the disciples that we took in during the past 100 years. Their disposition is truly far too pathetic. There's only a single Ma Kuxuan, yet they're jumping around in disarray and fear. with even their Tao hearts completely shaken. All of them are spouting sour shit behind his back. They're worse than mortal women gossiping. The handsome man waved his hand and commented, "Their Tao hearts aren't shaken. Rather, their Tao hearts were weak and fragile to begin with." "You're not going to do something about this?" the old man asked in puzzlement. "Then should I take care of their eating and shitting as well? Should I take care of your loose pants as well?" the handsome man retorted. The old man rolled his eyes. "Rest assured, ma kukshuan vontedi." The handsome man waved a hand and turned his attention back to the go board. The militarian grand elder roared with laughter before suddenly standing up and exclaiming, "Senior brother, why you should have said this earlier. That way, I wouldn't have needed to waste half a day with you here." "Your belt is loose," the handsome man said without looking up. The old man chuckled and remarked, "You're still as fond of telling jokes as always." In the next moment, however, the old man suddenly yelped in a flustered manner, hurriedly activating a mystical ability and disappearing with a flash. As it turned out, the handsome man had caused the nascent tier Earth Immortals belt to crumble with a casual wave of his hand. Not only that, but the Earth Immortal hadn't noticed this at all. What if the handsome man had wanted to kill him? In the eyes of Eastern treasured Vile Continent, True Martial Mountain was powerful in the sense that it had a huge influence over mortal empires. In terms of individual cultivation base and combat power, the many militarian immortals from Wind Snow Temple were far more powerful than their counterparts in True Martial Mountain. Some people joke that if the two militarian ancestral forces each picked 10 members to battle against each other, the supremely powerful Wind Snow Temple would pummel the cultivators of True Martial Mountain until they cried for their ancestors. The handsome man put the old Go manual on the table. The manual was called Endgame Collection, and he had memorized the entire contents of the manual already. It recorded the endgame plays of many famous historical matches, and the endgame play that the handsome man was setting up right now was called the Iridescent Cloud Setup. The opponents in this game had been the City Lord of White Emperor City, and the former first disciple of the scholarly sage. The handsome man sighed softly. Inside the Divine Martial Hall located at the back of the mountain, Ma Kushwan was sitting cross-legged on the head of a tall statue of a deity. Meanwhile, a black cat was sitting on the young boy's head. A person, a cat, and the statue of a deity. The black cat extended a paw and lightly scratched Ma Kushwan's head. Ma Kushwan paid no heed to this. He and the black cat had depended on each other ever since he was little, and this was even more the case now that his grandma had passed away. A golden glow suddenly appeared in the eyes of a gold-gilded wooden statue to the left of Ma Kushwan. There was a rumble as the gigantic statue of the deity started to move, slowly stepping down from its divine altar and looking around at its surroundings. In the end, its gaze settled on Ma Kushwan, who was sitting on the head of the statue in the middle. The 9-meter-tall statue of the deity walked to the center of the large hall before turning to the young boy and his cat and kneeling down on one knee. Ma Kushwan was seemingly used to this, and he simply repeated the same warning that he always gave: "Remember to keep quiet after you go back." The wooden statue of the deity nodded lightly before standing up and striding forward, returning to its original position on the divine altar. It wasn't long before it became still, with the golden glow quickly disappearing from its eyes. The doors and windows of the great hall were extremely large, allowing many rays of light to seep through and scatter across the floor. Thus, even the dust in the great hall was visible. Having too many immortal treasures and having too good a fortune is also quite annoying, Ma Kushwan suddenly remarked in a self-ridiculing manner. The black cat raised a leg and gently licked its paw. Ma Kushwan leaned back and lay down. The black cat jumped up, and it landed on Ma Kushwan's chest after the young boy finished his movement. It curled up and quickly fell asleep. The black cat occasionally shifted into a more comfortable position. Ma Kushwan crossed his legs and raised a hand to stroke the soft fur of the black cat. He recalled both the taunting remarks and the obsequious comments that he had heard in True Martial Mountain, and he felt like all of these things were quite uninteresting. So what if you people don't like me? I don't like you people either. The great hall was spacious and ethereal. Only the soft snoring of a person and a cat cut through the silence. The golden statues of the deities stood in a row, appearing as if they were loyally guarding their ruler who stood high above them, day by day, year after year, for 1,000 years and then for 10,000. Zhou, the virtuous scholar from Lakeview Academy, didn't follow his sagely master to complete Reed Continent to visit that Taoist heavenly lord. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to contain himself from insulting Xie. If that were to happen, he would only be making things more difficult for his master. After leaving the academy, his master definitely couldn't rival Xie. However, his master also couldn't stand there and do nothing if Xie wanted to smack his disciple to death. That being the case, what else could he do? Apologize to an outsider for his disciple? Thus, Zhou traveled to a mountain peak not far from where Ceremony Mountain's Kuan ship had fallen. According to the records, the soaring sword chi had originated from this location and annihilated the Kuan ship traveling south to Old Dragon City. There had been many casualties and almost everyone under the middle 5 tiers had been killed. Zhou found nothing on the mountain. There wasn't a single trace left. However, this was completely reasonable and expected. After all, even blind fools could see that someone was carefully plotting and scheming behind the scenes. Someone was trying to frame this very powerful empire in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. However, there was one thing that Zhou couldn't wrap his mind around. Why was the mighty Tao Lord of Complete Reed Continent willing to lower his status and become involved in this complicated matter? In fact, he was even willing to go as far as to take arms against Lakeview Academy. If this continued, it was very likely that Heavenly Lord Xie would become the common enemy of all chi refiners in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Perhaps Xie was truly treating himself as the second disciple of the Tao ancestor? Zhou wasn't convinced that the Greatly Empire's Song clan could employ the help of a heavenly lord from another continent. After staying in the wilderness for many days, Zhou planned to leave the mountains soon. He had heard his master casually mention one matter. During the past half a year, many previously lost and ownerless immortal treasures had suddenly started to appear in 3 continents: Southern World Continent, Parasol Leaf Continent, and Circling Ascension Continent. In fact, there were even traces of several pseudo-celestial tools hidden among these immortal treasures. This triggered a huge commotion, and countless vagrant cultivators from the mountains and marshes rushed over to the locations where the treasures had appeared. The powerful immortal clans and forces naturally weren't willing to abandon these significant fated opportunities either. All of a sudden, there was a murky mix of all kinds of people and temporary alliances. Zhou wasn't interested in these matters. He was even less interested in the worldly matters that were going to follow. This was because it would most certainly become even more difficult for scholars to read and study in peace. Zhou raised his head and looked up at the sky. I, Zhou, Lakeview Academy's measly virtuous scholar, Zhou Yuran, am also able to discover some traces, so what about you people, beings who have an even higher status than my master? Zhou silently made his way down the mountain. He wandered down lazily, either riding on the wind or walking with both feet. In the end, he arrived at a bustling market and drank a steaming bowl of hot and sour soup. A smile instantly spread across Zhou's face, wiping all of the irritation from his mind. The stall owner's daughter was right in her youthful prime. Her skin was slightly tanned, yet it shone with a healthy luster. She secretly stole a few glances at Zhou. There were few scholars in her hometown, and there were even fewer scholars who were as handsome as him. She felt like even taking a single extra glance would be good. And thus, Zhou ordered another bowl of hot and sour soup. Before boarding the treasure-swallowing whale that was headed for Parasol Leaf Continent, Chun Ping'an purposely went to the market next to the incense offering tower. He bought a tube of incense that contained 81 sticks of 3 pure incense, a specialty product of Stalactite Mountain. This incense gave off a refreshing fragrance, and it was a premium product whether one used it to pay respects to deities or to calm one's mind. However, it was quite dear, commanding a price of 1 lesser heat coin per tube, a full 100 snowflake coins. Why had Chun Ping'an spent such an exorbitant amount of money on some incense? This was because he had recalled the mountain god temple in his downtrodden mountain back at home. If friends visited in the future, he could give them these sticks of incense to offer. After all, it would be a beautiful thing if his friends could pay their sincere respects and the mountain god could enjoy premium incense. Apart from this tube of incense from the market next to the incense offering tower, as well as the 2 treasures that he had spent a huge amount of money to purchase from Ganoderma, Chun Ping'an also bought a copy of the Sword Immortal Picture Scrolls, with his set of paintings being composed by a masterful painter from southern world continent. There were 5 scrolls in total, with each being very large and long. There were 20 sword immortals illustrated on each of the 5 scrolls, and each was only but an inch tall. However, they all appeared extremely lively and ethereal. Of course, the sword immortal picture scrolls that Qian Ping'an purchased was only a copy. The original picture scrolls were illustrated by a grandmaster painter after he witnessed a battle on the Sword Qi Great Wall. Afterward, countless people created copies of his work. There were far too many sword immortals honored in the Sword Reverence Pagoda. So the Rock Channel copy of the Sword Immortal picture scrolls that Qian Ping'an purchased only contained 100 sword immortals chosen according to the whims of the painter. There were several other copies in the store, with the Rock Channel version being the most expensive among the options. After carefully comparing them, Qian Ping'an had discovered that the sword immortals illustrated in the Rock Channel version resonated with him the most. Thus, he had gritted his teeth and bought this version. This had genuinely been a notable expense. The set of picture scrolls had cost him a whopping 50 lesser heat coins. Qian Ping'an planned to give this set of sword immortal picture scrolls to Sage Ruanqiong as a congratulatory present in the future. When Qian Ping'an had left his hometown, Dragon Spring Prefecture, back then, Master Ruan had still yet to carry out his sect founding ceremony. However, he had most likely carried it out by now. To Ruanqiong, 50 lesser heat coins was definitely a measly sum that wasn't worth a mention. However, this was at least something purchased from Stalactite Mountain and brought back to the Greatly Empire's Dragon Spring Prefecture. With a distance of thousands of mountains and rivers between the two places, it was ultimately the thought that counted rather than the present itself. People say that clothes make the man. As Qian Ping'an walked toward the incense offering dock, several female immortals in their prime surprisingly shot a few glances at him, the type where they came back for seconds and thirds, and not the type where they lost their interest after a single glance. Compared to his trip to Stalactite Mountain to deliver the sword to Ning Yao, Qian Ping'an was more concerned about his imminent trip to Parasol Leaf Continent to search for the old Taoist priest. After confirming that the young female immortals weren't harboring any ill intentions, Qian Ping'an pushed them out of his mind and paid them no more heed. The incense offering dock was larger than the catch and release dock. Yet Qian Ping'an didn't see the treasure-swallowing whale that was guaranteed to be colossal in size. Standing there with the boarding jade pendant tied to his waist, Qian Ping'an saw a mountain and sea turtle that had courtyards and pagodas on its back, as well as a gigantic carriage drawn by an azure phoenix and a celestial crane. There was also something that the Mountain and Sea Chronicle described as unique to circling Ascension Continent, a small mountain peak filled with lush green foliage. However, it was unknown whether this mountain was a flying-over mountain or flying-away peak. It was said that the mountain roots formed by the accumulation of spiritual energy in these mountains were extremely nutritious to flood dragons. When ancient flood dragons entered rivers to transform into dragons in the past, they would pick a suitable river leading to the sea before asking someone to bring flying-over mountains and flying-away peaks over to toss into the river. This would allow them to replenish their energy in a timely manner and prevent them from becoming exhausted and draining all of their qi and blood. Qian Ping'an had only just started to learn the official dialect of Middle-earth Divine Continent, so he was destined to be unintelligible when he tried to ask for directions. If others couldn't understand him, he would have no option but to take out a bamboo slip and carve out his questions. Fortunately, Qian Ping'an found a few passengers who had jade pendants of the same style hanging by their waist. Thus, he silently followed them for a while, and it wasn't long before they arrived at some place that was bustling with people. Qian Ping'an breathed a sigh of relief. However, someone suddenly tapped his left shoulder lightly, yet Qian Ping'an directly turned his head toward the right, only to see a familiar face. Seeing that Qian Ping'an didn't fall for their trick, the person lost interest and said in a lazy voice, "What, are you also heading to Planchette Writing Sect in Parasol Leaf Continent? Is this a huge coincidence? You're not coveting something of mine, are you? Perhaps you're coveting my beauty." The guilty person is making accusations first? Qian Ping'an had a neutral impression of this person. It was someone with a pearl hairpin, a pink dress and a colorful ribbon around the waist. A very beautiful young man. If their encounter on Osmanthus Island traveling from Old Dragon City to Stalactite Mountain could be put down to fate, then it was incredibly likely that ulterior motives existed now that they were on the same intercontinental ship from Stalactite Mountain to Planchette Writing Sect. The young man with the surname Liu, someone who was previously beaten out of the incense-offering tower by the young Taoist priest guarding the door, clearly noticed the alertness in Qian Ping'an's eyes. He patted his boarding jade pendant for the treasure-swallowing whale and chuckled. "Just as you suspect, I am going to Planchette Writing Sect after I waited for someone for a long time. Indeed, I've been waiting for you. What kind of admission is this?" Qian Ping'an was slightly perplexed. Yet he decided that he would definitely keep a respectful distance from this person. Not only was this young man as beautiful as a woman, but his voice was also crisp and pleasant to the ear. Qian Ping'an could feel his head becoming slightly numb. If you're worried about other people looking at you in strange ways and judging you, then why aren't you worried about me looking at you in strange ways and judging you? Lu Tai surprisingly started to pout and act cute, saying, "Pretty please, Qian Ping'an? Can you please bring me along with you? I can swear to the heavens that I don't harbor any ill intentions toward you. Otherwise, I'll be punished by the heavens, and I'll be thrown into a lake of lightning. I'll also be suppressed under Tassel Mountain, and I'll be imprisoned in the furnace in the Dragon Palace deep under the sea. I'll be exiled to some desolate mystical realm where there exists no person for tens of thousands of kilometers." As Lu Tai uttered this nonsense, he even extended a hand that was even paler and more slender than that of a woman and tried to grab Qian Ping'an's arm. Qian Ping'an got goosebumps all over his body, and he no longer cared about whether he was polite as he slapped Lu Tai's hand away and said in a righteous and strict manner, "Young M. Miss Liu, please conduct yourself with dignity." Lu Tai huffed and retracted his hand. Standing still, he bit his lips with a sulky look in his eyes. He looked to be on the verge of tears. Qian Ping'an turned around and left. However, Lu Tai followed him like a shadow, stopping when Qian Ping'an stopped and turning his head when Qian Ping'an turned his head. At some point in time he even retrieved a small and exquisite copper mirror from some unknown place. There was also a small container of makeup powder between his fingers. It was as if he were a beautiful woman applying makeup in her room. Even though Qian Ping'an was already relatively familiar with Lu Tai, he was still completely terrified by this image. His hair stood on end. However, many male cultivators in the surroundings had a longing look in their eyes. In fact, some elderly and experienced cultivators at the Golden Core tier and Nascent tier had fervent expressions in their eyes even though they saw through Lu Tai's disguise and knew that he was a man. On the path of cultivation and throughout their long lives, there would eventually come a time when nothing was taboo. Lu Tai was like a pitiful young wife who had been abandoned. He didn't dare to complain to the heartless man, and he only dared to silently follow him from a distance, reluctant to leave. People in the surroundings looked at them with amused expressions. Qian Ping'an had never experienced this kind of repulsive approach before. He was filled with anger, yet he didn't know how to deal with Lu Tai. People continued to vanish near the front of the ferry station, and only then did Qian Ping'an discover the boarding location for the treasure-swallowing whale. These were lengths of embroidery draped over the ground. When Qian Ping'an had purchased his boarding jade pendant back then, there had been 3 different options on offer: Cloud on Peak, Enchanting Garden, and Emerald Lake. Qian Ping'an had gone with Emerald Lake, the medium-priced option. Looking at the 3 lengths of embroidery on the ground, Qian Ping'an saw that the scenery on each was distant. There was one with flowing mists and clouds amid which a lone mountain peak towered through. There was an emerald lake atop which residences lay like the starry sky. And there was a collection of courtyards and pagodas filled with colorful flowers in full bloom. Not far behind him, Miss Liu explained in a timid voice, "It's not like people can board the treasure-swallowing whale from its mouth. This treasure-swallowing whale is very large, and it can be regarded as the largest one in Golden Armor Continent. There are 4 separate mystical realms inside this treasure-swallowing whale, with 3 of them transformed into residential areas for passengers. In comparison, there's only a single mystical realm inside the treasure-swallowing whale from Old Dragon City. It's far inferior to this one. As for the 3 lengths of embroidery, these are actually extremely high-grade land-shortening talismans that can help passengers immediately travel to their relevant mystical realm." A look of realization spread across Qian Ping'an's face. The all-encompassing Divine Book Mountain and Sea Chronicle had detailed records regarding mystical realms. Because this pertained to blessed lands, And since it was strongly related to Jules' small world as well, Qian Ping'an had been especially attentive when reading the relevant sections. In fact, he had especially looked for the young and manager of Storkin and asked him about some things that weren't recorded in the book. Those who were born and raised in Stalactite Mountain were often very knowledgeable and spoke in a very confident manner regardless of their cultivation base and family situation. They talked about everything without fear, from sages to heavenly lords to earth immortals. In any case, the range and depth of their knowledge and experiences were indeed superior to any place outside Stalactite Mountain. The young and manager was a taciturn person, yet he had chatted freely with Qian Ping'an in a rare display. He had most likely treated Qian Ping'an as an esteemed guest. Many blessed lands that naturally aged and crumbled or were destroyed by external factors would leave behind pieces of territory after they shattered. However, the locations of these territories were unknown, and thus they were aptly referred to as mystical realms. For instance, the wine shop that sold Forgetting Sorrow wine in Stalactite Mountain was the sole remaining mystical realm of Golden Millet Blessed Land. Oftentimes, the fated opportunities of cultivators would be intricately tied to mystical realms. Mystical realms could add icing to the cake, and they could also deliver help in times of great need. It could be said that the existence of mystical realms, both large and small, instilled qi refiners with a sense of ambition and yearning. Indeed, the large majority of vagrant cultivators and itinerant cultivators who managed to rise and achieve fame could attribute their success to fated opportunities obtained from mystical realms. It was possible for cultivators to inadvertently wander into unoccupied mystical realms by chance. These mystical realms might be paradises filled with the essence of plants and life, or they might be vast expanses of desolate land filled with the miasma of poison. They might also be cave abodes left behind by sages after they passed away. If one were fortunate, they could obtain rare fated opportunities and ascend to the heavens in a single step. If one were unfortunate, however, then they might perhaps become trapped in the mystical realm forever, eventually dying of old age. Or perhaps they might face some perilous danger and be killed. In the end, their belongings would become nothing more than fated opportunities for those who stumbled upon the mystical realm in the future. Qian Ping'an was very keen to know whether Jules' small world left any mystical realms in the world after crumbling and plummeting to the ground. He could ask Wei Bo when he returned home in the future. With these thoughts in mind, Qian Ping'an walked toward the length of embroidery that led toward the emerald lake inside the treasure-swallowing whale. Lu Tai sighed in grief and quickened his pace, calmly walking over and blocking Qian Ping'an's path. He extended a hand and said, "I initially planned to go to the emerald lake as well. However, since you loathe me so much, I won't be a thorn in your side anymore. I can change my residence and I can pay some more money and ask someone to move me to that prestigious enchanting garden instead. Let's part ways here. Qian Ping'an, you said you would lend me some lesser heat coins before. Does this offer still stand? Otherwise, I won't be able to move to the enchanting garden." Lu Tai was pouting and pitiful, and his appearance appeared strange no matter how Qian Ping'an looked at him. Qian Ping'an directly retrieved a handful of lesser heat coins, happy to lose money to avoid calamity. He walked over and hurriedly handed the money to Lu Tai. Qian Ping'an was willing to spend this money as long as this person didn't disturb him anymore. He wanted to peacefully practice his fist techniques and sword techniques on the intercontinental ship. After accepting the lesser heat coins, there was a deep sense of grievance in Lu Tai's watery eyes as he dazedly stared at Qian Ping'an. In the end, he silently turned around and left, most likely looking for someone to help change his residence. When Qian Ping'an walked onto the strange land-shortening talisman, he saw a delighted Lu Tai winking at him from a distance. The feminine man raised his hand and waved the jade pendant that had the characters, Emerald Lake, engraved on it. As it turned out, Lu Tai was genuinely strapped for money. As a result, he had only been able to purchase a boarding jade pendant for the cheapest Cloud on Peak mystical realm in the beginning. Afterward, however, his colorful lies had convinced Qian Ping'an to give him a handful of lesser heat coins. Lu Tai's footsteps were light and nimble as he walked toward the length of embroidered brocade rug that Qian Ping'an was on in a lively and mischievous manner. His expression was smug, and he appeared even more beautiful and charming than before. Before vanishing from the ferry station, Qian Ping'an couldn't help but curse that young lady in his mind, exclaiming, "Fucking hell." Qian Pingyan arrived on a platform in the middle of a lake. He looked around at the vast and rippling surface of Emerald Lake, upon which wisps of mist were rising. There were 100 or so pagodas floating above the lake, with each connected to another via a series of small paths. Each pagoda was also provided with 2 or 3 small boats, allowing passengers to explore the lake and enjoy the scenery. There were many tall and graceful young girls in green dresses, most of them around 13 or 14 years old. They were all very beautiful, and they were currently guiding passengers in the right direction. The pagoda that Qian Pingyan was staying in was called Lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda. When purchasing the boarding jade pendant, the seller had suggested that Qian Pingyan consider allowing others to stay in this pagoda as well, especially since it was 3 stories tall. That way, his boarding jade pendant would also become cheaper. After giving this some thought, however, Qian Pingyan had ultimately turned down the offer. The worker selling boarding jade pendants for treasure-swallowing whale hadn't found this strange. After all, it was normal for cultivators to prefer living by themselves. However, if it were a vagrant cultivator, it was more likely that they would be willing to share a pagoda with others. This was because it was extremely difficult for them to earn money, and they had to carefully budget everything. Moreover, living with others might give them the opportunity to build relationships and expand their network. When it came to cultivation, it wouldn't be a bad thing to make new friends, even if the friendship was only shallow. After all, there might come a time when fortunes changed and these relationships transformed into significant fated opportunities. After a maidservant in green pointed Qian Pingyan in the right direction, he left the tall platform in the middle of Emerald Lake and slowly walked along a small path. From time to time, immortals would fly past above or beside him, with some traveling on swords and some traveling on the wind. After walking for a short while, a beautiful young woman held the hem of his dress and ran over in small steps, appearing extremely playful and innocent. Qian Pingyan was not the kind to fear trouble. From his time as an apprentice in the dragon kiln where he was given extremely difficult tasks and scolded to the time when he accompanied Li Baoping, Li Huai, and the others to Mountain Cliff Academy in the capital of Great Sui Nation, he had always taken care of all matters regardless of how big or small they were. However, even though Qian Pingyan wasn't afraid of this kind of trouble, he was indeed very afraid of another kind of trouble, a kind that was intangible and unpredictable. For example, this naturalist called Lu Tai. Even though Qian Pingyan didn't feel any instinctive apprehension toward him, and didn't feel the kind of pressure and darkness that radiated from Funan Hua and Shui Chan, Qian Pingyan was still used to guaranteeing the safety of a matter before determining whether it was good or bad. In Stalactite Mountain, how many people dreamed of stepping into the ape havoc estate owned by the Lu clan? The young man who had introduced himself as Lu Tai, a descendant from the Lu clan in Middle-earth Divine Continent, walked alongside Qian Pingyan. He turned around to glance at the side of Qian Pingyan's face as he smiled beautifully and asked, "Are you angry? It's not good for men to be so petty. You need to be more magnanimous. The more magnanimous one is, the more fortunate one will eventually become. The Confucians posit that noble people aren't tools when. You should have heard of this before, right?" Qian Pingyan stopped and turned around to look at the strange person, asking, "Why are you following me around? What are you trying to achieve? If I remember right, your divination that yielded excellent fortune has got nothing to do with me." "What do you mean it's got nothing to do with you?" Lu Tai smiled with squinted eyes as he cut Qian Pingyan off. "I used the grain rain coin that you gave me to perform the divination. In other words, it's got everything to do with you. You're the crux of the Go board that contains this fated opportunity." It was Qian Pingyan's turn to cut Lu Tai off and he stressed, "I didn't give you the grain rain coin. I only lent it to you." Lu Tai furrowed his drawn eyebrows even more slender than those of women. He pondered carefully for a moment before asking in a gentle voice, "Talking about money all the time is bad for relationships. Why don't we make a deal? I'll give you an immortal treasure that I'm fond of in exchange for some more grain rain coins." Qian Pingyan shook his head and replied, "No thanks. You can keep your debt. Why are you so afraid of me? Why do you treat me like a fearsome beast?" Lu Tai asked in an upset voice. "Just think about it. How beautiful is it to come across a fated friend on the path of cultivation and travel around the world together, enjoying all the mountains and rivers together." Qian Pingyan could feel a headache forming. As it turned out, There were genuinely matters in the world that even reason couldn't solve. Chen Ping'an didn't know what to say. The two of them silently continued forward. Chen Ping'an was at a loss for words. Lu Tai looked around before saying to himself, "This mystical realm used to be a part of the Hanging Flower Blessed Land. A blessed land owned by a female immortal who liked to collect spring water from around the world. However, it's a shame that she ultimately failed when attempting to advance to the Ascension tier. Not only was she killed, but the backlash from the heavenly Tao also destroyed the Hanging Flower Blessed Land, causing most of it to scatter across the world. This Emerald Lake is one of the more famous mystical realms remaining from the Blessed Land. The lake is 300 kilometers across and contains the renowned spring water that the female immortal collected when she was still alive. If one can identify and draw water from the subtle water veins that contain the essence of the spring water, one will find that this water is best for brewing tea." Chen Ping'an offered no response as he continued to walk forward. After walking 2 or 3 kilometers, he saw the lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda. There were covered walkways running around the pagoda, enclosed by white jade railings. There was also a small dock with 2 small boats. Not far from the lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda, there was also a large patch of lotus flowers amid which young women were rowing boats and harvesting lotus seeds. They were humming tunes from their hometown that sounded mellow and moving. Chen Ping'an stopped and said to the feminine young man, "I've arrived." Lu Tai nodded in response. Upon seeing him play dumb, Chen Ping'an could only cut straight to the point and say, "I won't invite you inside today. If I have time later, I'll go over to your place to visit you. Where are you staying?" Lu Tai raised a hand and pointed at the lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda. Chen Ping'an smiled wryly and said, "Please don't joke around, young Master Lu." Lu Tai lifted his hands and showed off the large handful of lesser heat coins, saying, "When we were at the platform in the middle of the lake just then, I was forced to make a decision for the sake of my livelihood. Seeing that the relationship between us is so good, I surmised that you would give me a place to stay no matter what. Thus, I sold my place to a very wealthy immortal." Chen Ping'an's expression was quite dark. "Rest assured, I definitely won't disturb your cultivation." Lu Tai hurriedly added, "I'll be fine if you lend me a small boat. I can sleep there at night. If there aren't any pressing issues, I promise that I definitely won't enter the lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda. I've also brought some food with me, so you don't need to worry about me at all. Living in this world as a cultivator, which place isn't a temporary abode? You certainly don't need to feel any guilt. Enduring hardships is also a form of cultivation." Chen Ping'an's expression was completely dark. How could there be such a shameless person in the world? Lu Tai suddenly smiled and said, Okay, I'll be honest with you. Apart from receiving an excellent fortune divination that pertained to becoming nobility during this trip to Parasol Leaf Continent, I actually discovered that the fated opportunity in this trip doesn't lie with treasures. Instead, it's related to the characters, observing Tao on the Ascending Sun platform, traveling with you and borrowing your mind's realm. I can temper my Tao heart regardless of the state of your mind. This is called borrowing stones from another mountain to polish jade." After saying this, Lu Tai caught himself with a chuckle and corrected, No, what I meant to say was borrowing jade from another mountain to polish stone." Chen Ping'an didn't dwell on Lu Tai's slip-up. However, he was both worried and relieved when he heard Lu Tai mention observing Tao. He was relieved because Lu Tai most likely wasn't speaking nonsense. Thus, this wasn't a plot that specifically targeted him. However, he was worried because Lu Tai, someone with an unknown background, was now following him around as he traveled to Parasol Leaf Continent to search for that Taoist temple and the old Taoist priest. Was this not an unnecessary complication? Lu Tai hesitated for a moment before seemingly making a huge decision. He gritted his teeth and said, "If you're always guarding against me everywhere, it will definitely affect my opportunity to observe Tao and become nobility. I can earnestly tell your fortune a single time. Let me tell you something. My fortune-telling is quite accurate as long as one's fortune doesn't relate to individuals who are too powerful. Otherwise, I'll suffer quite a bit if one's fortune pertains to immortals at the upper 5 tiers. It's hundreds upon thousands of times more painful than sleeping in a small boat or whatnot. Chen Ping'an, this is a rare opportunity, so make sure to grab it with both hands." As if afraid that Chen Ping'an wouldn't believe him, Lu Tai fixed his gaze on the young boy and added, I'm not lying to you. Qian Ping'an sighed and shook his hands, turning down Lu Tai's offer. He simply said, "You can stay in the lingering shade mountain pagoda. However, we'll each cultivate on our own afterward, and we won't interfere with each other's cultivation." There was a strange expression on Lu Tai's face as he looked at Qian Ping'an's leaving figure. He was dazed for a while before a look of realization and relief spread across his face. He hurriedly walked over to keep up with Qian Ping'an. In the end, Qian Ping'an decided to stay on the first floor while Lu Tai chose to stay on the third floor. As if in tacit understanding, the second floor separated the two of them. Lu Tai comfortably lay down on a bed on the third story with a lazy and satisfied expression. He couldn't help but chuckle. Haha, men and women who aren't related should keep their distance too. Since Lu Tai insisted on following him, Qian Ping'an decided to go with the flow and give him a place to stay. Qian Ping'an paid no more heed to the mysterious naturalist disciple. Apart from the sword on his back and the sword-nurturing gourd by his waist, Qian Ping'an had no other items on him. He was light and at ease. Of course, the only bug in his drink right now was his uninvited guest. Qian Ping'an sat at the table by the window and took out a stack of books from 15th. There was the Immortal book, the Mountain and Sea Chronicle, the two books introducing the official dialects of Middle-earth Divine Continent and Parasol Leaf Continent, and the travel journal that he had obtained in Colorful Garment Nation. Qian Ping'an carefully stacked these books on the table before retrieving some precious bamboo slips that had come from the Divine Mountain in Bamboo Sea Small World. He planned to inscribe some quotes as he read. Every day, he would practice the mountain-shaking fist in the morning, train according to the proper sword scripture in the afternoon, and read and learn the official dialects of the two continents at night. There was one thing that he found quite strange. This was clearly a shattered mystical realm. Yet the sun and moon still rose and set, with their reflections dazzling across Emerald Lake in a peculiar manner. There was still day and night like the normal world. He didn't know whether this was a supreme illusion technique, applied by some immortal or a unique rule that applied to shattered blessed lands. Qian Ping'an strolled along the walkway surrounding the lingering shade mountain pagoda. As he practiced walking meditation, there was a cool breeze gently carrying with it the refreshing fragrance of the nearby lotus flowers. There was also the indistinctive sound of young girls singing as they harvested lotus seeds. It was with such a backdrop that a young boy in white calmly threw punches. In the afternoon, Qian Ping'an would stay in the first floor of the pagoda as he practiced sword techniques. He wouldn't go to the walkway outside the building. Same as always, he still used an imaginary sword, even though he had a real one he could practice with. This was because lasting qi, the sword on his back, could help temper his soul. This was a form of cultivation in and of itself. Thus, Qian Ping'an wouldn't remove the sword from his back even when he slept at night. Instead, he would choose to sleep on his side. The sword-nurturing gourd was hanging high in front of his bed. He no longer drank as frequently now, so there was no need to always keep the wine gourd by his waist. Meanwhile, his mental connection with his two flying swords, 1st and 15th, became stronger and stronger. This was thanks to them staying together day and night during the long journeys that covered tens of thousands of kilometers. The tacit understanding between them was becoming more and more apparent. At the same time, communication with the flying swords also became smoother and smoother. It was as if Qian Ping'an's two flying swords were becoming more mature and intelligent. After going to sleep, Qian Ping'an would task his two flying swords with guarding the building. 1st didn't agree, but it didn't refuse either. 15th, who was more docile, it happily nodded, inside the sword-nurturing gourd. While reading at night, Qian Ping'an sometimes also took out the authentic death-avoiding book on a whim. After advancing to the 4th tier, he discovered that he could draw two more types of talismans. One was the Mountain and River Sword Edict Talisman. The book specified that the character Mountain referred to the mountain of the three mountains, yet it didn't go into more detail about what this meant. The character River was also explained in a very general and vague manner. It only said that a divine person once ruled over the rivers and was responsible for slaying sin and vanquishing evil. This divine person was also fond of swallowing all ghosts. The Sword Edict Talisman was a type of defensive talisman. As for the second talisman, the Rain-Praying Talisman, the name was pretty self-explanatory. It could summon dark clouds and bring forth a deluge of rain. The Rain-Praying Talisman was a type of altar talisman. one that was mostly mastered and used by powerful talisman masters from the Taoist sect. Chen Ping'an didn't have much interest in this talisman. These two talismans were of a slightly higher grade compared to the Yang Energy Illumination Talisman, the Cleansing Talisman, and the Treasure Pagoda Demon Suppressing Talisman. Chen Ping'an was especially serious about the Sword Edict Talisman, so he used a piece of the most ordinary yellow talisman paper to draw the talisman. It was a slight struggle. After advancing to the 3 Qi tempering tiers of martial arts, Chen Ping'an's soul stabilized significantly, allowing it to become increasingly pure and powerful. He could often hear the imperceptible sound of dripping water as his 3 souls passed by his mind's lake. Thus, Chen Ping'an could already tell that there was a lack of mental intent in his Sword Edict talisman. However, he wasn't sure about how powerful this talisman was. Since Lu Tai was staying on the 3rd floor, Chen Ping'an also decided against testing the talisman to verify its power. After 10 days, Chen Ping'an would occasionally hear the sound of light footsteps on the 2nd floor. However, this was rare, and Lu Tai never once came down to the 1st floor to disturb Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an felt slightly more at ease. This was a fated encounter that had run into him for no reason, so he was happy as long as it wasn't an ill-boding one. He would not actively try to get something out of it. On this night, Chen Ping'an finished drawing his 2nd Sword Edict talisman. However, he still wasn't very satisfied. Just like pottery molding and pottery firing, those who were skilled in the trade could immediately identify the differences between 2 pieces of work, even if they looked identical to the uninitiated. Perhaps he genuinely needed to look for the ruins of an ancient battlefield and seek out those heroic spirits to fight against. Perhaps this was the only way to perfect his 4th-tier martial arts cultivation base, and this would then allow him to easily draw and master talismans such as the Sword Edict talisman. Chen Ping'an furrowed his brows and fell into deep thought. However, he suddenly turned around, only to see Lu Tai walking down the stairs before stopping and knocking on the wall as if he were knocking on a door. Lu Tai then smiled and sat down on the steps, not continuing down to the 1st floor. Chen Ping'an was just about to pick up the Mountain and Sea Chronicle to cover up and hide the Sword Edict talisman. Yet Lu Tai couldn't help but chuckle and say, "What is there to hide? It's nothing more than an ancient talisman that's been lost to the world. The grade of the talisman isn't high either, and its only advantage is the fact that it's returned to a state of pure and natural simplicity. I accidentally caught a glance of the talisman just then, and it caused my heart to ache with pain. In fact, it still aches right now." "Why is that?" Chen Ping'an asked. Lu Tai pointed at the Sword Edict talisman on the table and explained, "This defensive talisman is quite old. Even among the entire Lu clan, perhaps no one else around the same age as me can recognize it anymore. My heart is aching because number 1, you're a pure martial artist, so the absolutely appalling manner in which you've butchered that ancient and pure talisman is truly shameful." Chen Ping'an couldn't help but interject and say, "Isn't martial artists drawing talismans unreasonable in the first place?" Lu Tai pursed his lips and replied, "Oh, is that so? Then by the looks of it, the records in the Lu clan scripture library are incorrect. Or perhaps my knowledge is insufficient." However, Lu Tai didn't want to delve into this topic either, so he continued, "Number 2, you mostly rely on that brush when you're drawing talismans. In other words, it's not as if you have deep knowledge or skills in the art of drawing talismans. Maybe the destination that you want to reach is correct, but your path to this correct destination is full of wobbly twists and turns. As a result, the talismans that you draw are usable but just barely. Number 3, you're using good quality talisman paper, yet you're using it in a manner that's extremely crude and straightforward. This is an absolute waste of good material. In this sense, your manner of drawing talismans can't even be referred to as heretical. I should rather call it crooked and sinister. If skilled masters from the talismanic branch of the Taoist sect see you drawing talismans, they'll most likely feel a strong urge to smash you to death with a single punch." Chen Ping'an's brows were knitted into a deep frown. He carefully ruminated Lu Tai's words, first determining whether Lu Tai's remarks were true or false. Afterward, he determined whether they were useful or not useful. However, Lu Tai was far too mysterious, so it was very difficult for Chen Ping'an to reach a conclusion. Lu Tai smiled and asked, "Can you grab that talisman and allow me to carefully examine the quality of the talisman paper?" I was only able to catch a fleeting glance of it just then, so I don't dare to confirm my analysis. Qian Ping'an hesitated briefly before eventually deciding to pinch the sword edict talisman between his fingers and hold it up for Lu Tai to see its backside. Lu Tai smiled faintly and paid no heed to Qian Ping'an's excessive caution. He examined the talisman paper for a moment before nodding and saying, "Sure enough, this is the returning to spring talisman paper, a very precious type of talisman paper. After drawing a talisman on such talisman paper, one can use the talisman repeatedly. When it comes to the quality and strength of a successfully drawn talisman, the quality of the talisman paper also plays a very important role. Apart from those talismans that seek to maximize strength and destructive power, most genuinely good talismans in the world can be repeatedly used. But what about you?" According to the humorous remark of a grand elder from the talismanic branch, this is called fading youth in the mirror and falling flowers from a tree. Well, to put it simply, these are things that can't be held eternal. Tell me, Qian Ping'an, do you find this a shame? Talisman paper, especially returning to spring talisman paper, is especially good at burning through one's money. You can say that my heart is aching for you right now. Anyway, you're a wealthy person with a wealthy business, so you don't need to care about this measly amount of money. Qian Ping'an glanced at Lu Tai before glancing at the sword edict talisman that he had put back on the table. Lu Tai was slightly curious, so he rested his cheeks in his hands and gazed at the young boy who had a slightly regretful expression on his face as he sat by the table. Lu Tai smiled and asked, "Did the person who gave you these precious talisman papers not tell you about this before? Did the person who taught you how to draw talismans not tell you, a half-assed talisman cultivator, to be as sparing as you can?" Qian Ping'an heaved a heavy sigh. Lu Tai was slightly amused by Qian Ping'an's misfortune, and he gloated, "Pure martial artists at the 7th, 8th, and 9th tier can most likely create very decent talismans. They can rely on a single breath of true qi and draw a talisman in a single go. However, it's a pity that martial artists who have climbed up one step at a time and reached the pinnacle of the mountain already possess wills as powerful as iron. That being the case, who will run away to draw talismans? It's because you're fortunate enough to possess such precious talisman paper and such a good calligraphy brush that you're able to draw decent talismans. Otherwise, each talisman you draw will be equivalent to burning a huge stack of money. Your situation is slightly better, and you're only burning half a stack of money." Qian Ping'an shot a vicious glare at the beautiful young man pouring salt on his wounds. Lu Tai chuckled and continued, "Qian Ping'an, you're truly a very interesting person. You're a martial artist drawing talismans, and you even have a sword nurturing gourd and flying swords. The most insane thing is that you're even reading studiously every single night. Are you not afraid of dereliction of your actual duties and detrimentally affecting your martial arts cultivation? Are you not afraid of losing a clear identity and losing the ability to achieve anything?" Qian Ping'an didn't pay any attention to Lu Tai's thinly veiled insults. He put away the sword edict talisman and started to flip through the Mountain and Sea Chronicle. Lu Tai quietly stood up and returned to the 3rd floor. Afterward, Lu Tai started to leave the lingering Shade Mountain Pagoda from time to time, either rowing a small boat to enjoy the scenery around Emerald Lake, or visiting the treasure chambers that apparently every single treasure-swallowing whale possessed. In fact, treasure-swallowing whales were named as such because during their long lives, they would swallow those large ships that had encountered accidents and sunk to the bottom of the sea. Moreover, large ships that had the ability to traverse between continents were often worthy of being labeled treasure ships. Thus, a mature treasure-swallowing whale would definitely have all kinds of strange and peculiar items in its stomach. There would definitely be countless rare and unique treasures. In fact, there might even be the golden bodies of immortals left behind after they passed away. One afternoon, Lu Tai started to retrieve a set of tea instruments from his pocket treasure. There were so many items that it almost seemed cumbersome. Afterward, he used a secret technique to extract the essence of spring water from Emerald Lake, using this essence to leisurely brew tea in the corridor outside the 1st floor. The fragrance of this tea was especially pleasant. Qian Ping'an didn't go over to ask for a cup of tea. Instead, he simply practiced sword techniques inside the pagoda. Afterward, Lu Tai started to brew tea every day, enjoying the scenery as he sipped tea by himself. He would often sit there for entire afternoons at a time. Just before noon one day, Chen Ping'an was almost about to finish practicing walking meditation. At this moment he saw Lu Tai rowing a small boat and returning from the distance. After mooring the small boat, Lu Tai jumped onto the corridor and stood still. As Chen Ping'an walked past him while performing walking meditation, Lu Tai raised his hands high and revealed the boxes of makeup stacked in his hands. He was most likely showing off his bountiful yield for today. Not far from the platform in the middle of Emerald Lake, there were several pagodas that were shops run by the intercontinental ship. These were places that could quickly drain one of their wealth. Chen Ping'an only visited a single time, and he came to the conclusion that things were far too overpriced. Picking a few comparable items to look at, he discovered that things were even more exorbitantly expensive than the shops in Stalactite Mountain. Realizing this, Chen Ping'an lost all interest in purchasing things from these shops. With a tap of his feet, Lu Tai lightly jumped back and sat down on the white jade railings of the corridor. He then opened a box of makeup and took out a small copper mirror. He started to purse his lips, even extending a bent finger afterward and running its tip against his long eyebrows. His movements were delicate and refined. Chen Ping'an continued to make his way down the corridor as he practiced fist techniques, never shifting his gaze from the beginning to the end. When Chen Ping'an walked past Lu Tai a second time, the beautiful young man, carefully drawing his eyebrows, subtly moved his small copper mirror aside and asked with a smile, "Does it look good?" Chen Ping'an didn't look at Lu Tai applying makeup to his face or offer a response. Afterward, Lu Tai asked a different question each time Chen Ping'an walked past him. "Chen Ping'an, do you think this blusher is a bit too bright? Should I draw my eyebrows a bit more slender?" Sure enough, using the thin hairpin from the flower do shop to scoop makeup from the box will result in a more balanced and natural consistency. What do you think? Chen Ping'an ignored him and continued to silently practice walking meditation. He followed his original plan and practiced all the way until noon. The last time Chen Ping'an walked past Lu Tai, the latter didn't ask him any questions. Rather, Lu Tai placed the small copper mirror, hairpin, as well as several boxes of makeup on the railing beside him. He turned around to gaze at the large patch of lotus leaves, with his makeup exquisite and his eyes intoxicated. Chen Ping'an was just about to make his way to the entrance of the first floor. However, without retracting his gaze, Lu Tai asked again, "Do you think that a man like me is very laughable? In fact, you even feel a sense of disgust deep down in your heart." Chen Ping'an stopped before turning around to walk toward Lu Tai. When he arrived 5 to 6 paces away from Lu Tai, he also sat down on the railing with his face looking at the lake and his back facing the corridor. Lu Tai wasn't frustrated by Chen Ping'an's refusal to reply. He smiled beautifully to himself and picked up a box of makeup. He felt like its contents were quite poor, and it was unable to live up to its name. He decided not to use this box of makeup in the future. Thus, he casually tossed it into Emerald Lake. How much did that box of makeup cost? Chen Ping'an suddenly asked. Lu Tai faltered for a moment before also shifting his position such that he was facing the lake. He smiled and replied, "It wasn't too expensive. Each box only cost a single lesser heat coin. It just came out this year and it's already very famous. Quite a number of renowned celestial maidens from Middle-earth Divine Continent like to use it." "Ah? It was most likely a trick played by those scummy merchants. I was tricked by the group of them." Chen Ping'an sighed with emotion and said, "One lesser heat coin is equivalent to 100 snowflake coins, which is equivalent to 100,000 taels of silver. I feel like..." He paused for a moment and a gentle breeze brushed past his face as he continued, "Even 1,000 taels of gold might not be enough to purchase happiness. Perhaps the box of makeup wasn't expensive to you. However, some people will definitely be dumbfounded when they hear the price. Moreover, they'll refuse to believe that such exquisite makeup can exist in the world." Lu Tai was slightly puzzled. After falling silent for a short while, the young boy wearing a snow-white robe placed his hands on his knees and told Lu Tai the story about the feminine man from his hometown. Chen Ping'an didn't recount the story in a solemn manner, and his tone and expression weren't solemn either. He calmly described the tragic life of the deceased person to the young man beside him. This was a young man who had a colorful ribbon tied around his waist. This was a young man with an exuberant expression. He was an esteemed immortal, and he was more breathtakingly beautiful than real women. Meanwhile, that man from his hometown had only been slightly skinnier. In fact, he even had a stubble. He was no more beautiful than the woman in the markets. Even though he tidied up his appearance every morning, his fingernails would still be filled with clay when it was time to finish work and go home. Because of this, he wouldn't appear attractive at all when he made orchid-shaped fingers. Moreover, he was completely clueless about flying iridescent makeup, peach blossom makeup, and so on. He didn't understand how to apply lipstick, put on blusher, draw eyebrows, among many other things either. In the end, Qian Ping'an looked into the distance and said in a slightly sad voice, "After everything that happened, I still feel like he was a very strange person. He was clearly a man, so why did he like to dress up like a woman? However, he asked me for something on the day. He hid himself under the blankets and stabbed himself to death with a piece of porcelain. I didn't agree, and I still feel deep regret to this very day. If I knew what he would do, I would have definitely agreed to his request. He talked about many things with me on that day, and he eventually smiled and said that he planned to not act like a woman anymore. Because of this, he asked me to help look after that box of makeup for him, lest he couldn't control himself again. However, I naturally wouldn't agree to such a request at the time. I wouldn't agree no matter what. He tried to persuade me 2 times before giving up. After he died, no one saw where that box of makeup went. In fact, no one cared about it either." Qian Ping'an turned around and smiled as he looked at the stunningly beautiful Lu Tai, asking, "Why did you throw such an expensive box of makeup away?" Lu Tai cocked his head, causing his exquisite pearl hairpin to turn on an angle as well. He smiled faintly and replied, "Perhaps I should have given it to you then? When you return home in the future, you can take the box of makeup to that person's grave, and tell him that such exquisite makeup does indeed exist in the world. You can tell him to reincarnate into a better body in the next life, and become a girl who can apply as much makeup as she wants. She can apply kilograms at a time if she wants, and she won't need to worry about money either." Qian Ping'an turned back around and gazed into the distance. He gently shook his head and replied, "I can't even find his grave, so how can I show him this? How can I tell him these things?" The cleanly dressed young boy in white wrapped his hands behind his head, not saying anything else. This was only a story of the past. It was like a jar of old wine that had its clay seal broken. It had to be finished in a single go. This jar of old wine, these seemingly trivial matters, had fermented in Qian Ping'an's mind for many years. After opening up to the right person, the fragrance of wine would waft through the air. Moreover, Qian Ping'an would only whine when he came across the right people. Lu Tai was his drinking companion today. There were many people whom Qian Ping'an respected and had close relationships with. Ning Yao, Aoyang, Lu Xianying, Gu Qian, Taoist priest Zhang Shanfeng, and so on. However, he had never mentioned this story to them before. Yet, it was a shame that Lu Tai was seemingly unmoved after hearing the story. In the end, he even joked with Qian Ping'an and asked whether the young boy was trying to imply that unconventional and feminine men like him would almost all suffer miserable fates, so miserable that they weren't even afforded the dignity of having a grave. Qian Ping'an couldn't help but chuckle in surprise. He hopped off the railing and returned to the first floor of the pagoda. For some reason, Qian Ping'an felt much better after having a seemingly casual chat with Lu Tai, and telling him about these trivial matters from the past. It was as if he had untied a knot in his heart. In the afternoon, Qian Ping'an practiced sword techniques as always. He was still practicing the avalanche technique, and he felt like there was less resistance and more flow today. After today, Lu Tai also changed his manner of dressing. There was a jade hairpin in his hair, an azure robe on his body, and a yellow bamboo folding fan in his hand. He transformed from a stunning beauty into an elegant young master. This caused Qian Ping'an to breathe a sigh of relief. Thus, he didn't say anything even when Lu Tai came down to the first floor from time to time, either flicking through his books or brewing a pot of tea and watching him practice sword techniques from the proper sword scripture. Lu Tai also provided some suggestions and mentioned some things to look out for when tempering the 4th tier of martial arts. After a pure martial artist advanced to the 3 chi tempering tiers, there were many things they needed to consider regarding how they should temper their 3 souls. Of the 3 souls inside a person, the embryo light represented the yang energy of the Tai Ching. When martial artists tempered this soul, It was best that they picked a time when the sun was rising and the dawn iridescent clouds were making a dazzling appearance above the horizon. One couldn't slack off when practicing fist techniques, and it was through sincerity and hard work that one could move the heavens and crack apart gold. After enough tempering, perhaps one would encounter a fated opportunity that allowed their embryo light to become more powerful and filled with vitality. When Lu Tai mentioned this matter, Qian Ping'an felt utterly ashamed and guilty. While breaking through the third tier at the Sun Clan's ancestral residence in Old Dragon City, a golden flood dragon had furiously swooped down from the sea of iridescent clouds during dawn. Yet, he had swung his fists again and again and smashed the golden flood dragon back. Not once but twice. Lu Tai was sitting in a kneeling position near the window when he described these things to Qian Ping'an. After changing his outfit, he appeared much like a carefree scholar with his tall hat, wide belt, and large meandering sleeves. As he drank the tea that he had brewed using the essence of spring water from Emerald Lake, just how sharp and observant was his gaze. Thus, he immediately noticed that something was off about Qian Ping'an. After some probing that pertained to the cultivation of martial arts, Qian Ping'an eventually revealed his experience. Lu Tai immediately spit the tea from his mouth. He raised a thumb at Qian Ping'an and remarked that the old mister who had taught Qian Ping'an how to draw talismans and practice fist techniques was most likely a carefree person who acted according to his emotions and didn't dwell too much on trifling matters. Qian Ping'an asked whether there was a way to rectify the situation. Lu Tai pondered for a moment before drinking a cup of tea, and saying that Qian Ping'an could try his luck when he arrived at Parasol Leaf Continent. He could visit some martial sage temples where there were still deities wandering around the living world. After all, there were quite a number of astonishingly talented martial artists who had tried their luck in martial sage temples, and eventually obtained huge fated opportunities. Lu Tai couldn't help but sigh with emotion after saying this. He said that before leaving home to embark on this journey to train himself, he had heard his master mention a young martial artist from the Great Duan Empire. The aptitude and talent of this young martial artist were astounding, so much so that several deities from the martial sage temples actively sought him out. They all wanted to bestow martial fortune upon him. However, that young martial artist was even more insane than Qian Ping'an, and he had shockingly thrown punches and shooed away those deities from the martial sage temples who had gone over to offer their goodwill. Qian Ping'an speculated that the young martial artist was most likely Chao Ci, the person who had built a small thatched cottage and cultivated on the Sword Qi Great Wall. Lu Tai only mentioned this in passing, but it was a warning for both Qian Ping'an and himself, as if he were performing some self-reflection as well. He said that fortune was incredibly important when cultivating the Great Tao, and this was the same for pure martial artists and cultivators from the mountains alike. However, whether one could grab their fortune with both hands was even more important. Fortune and disaster often came hand in hand, and there were countless examples of prodigies who had suffered an early death. Qian Ping'an wholeheartedly agreed with this. However, Lu Tai suddenly changed his tone and said that it was very bad for Qian Ping'an to always stay in his room and feel apprehensive toward all trouble. It was very bad that he never tried to actively obtain fated opportunities, even going as far as to avoid them instead. Lu Tai was grumbling about this because Qian Ping'an had initially refused to interact with him no matter what. Not only that, but the treasure-swallowing whale they were on had just removed the restriction leading to the fourth mystical realm from the shattered blessed land. They were allowing passengers to enter and explore as long as they paid the entrance fee of 1 grain rain coin. Cultivators could train and cultivate inside the mystical realm, and anything they obtained would belong to them. The intercontinental ship wouldn't try to claim their yield. Of course, the intercontinental ship would also be happy to purchase any treasures that the cultivators were willing to sell. This treasure-swallowing whale was owned by the 5-weapon sect from Golden Armor Continent, and this mystical realm inside it contained many remnants of ancient mystical abilities extremely difficult to shatter. Huge amounts of resources were required to remove some of these mystical abilities. After obtaining this mystical realm, the 5-weapon sect had explored it by themselves for 100 years as was the norm. In the end, however, they discovered that they had put in more than they had received. Thus, they decided to call this mystical realm the Ascending True Immortal Mystical Realm, and open it up to the passengers on the ship. Just like Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Jewel Small World, The five-weapon sect simply collected entrance fees from those who wanted to enter. The ascending true immortal mystical realm measured 500 kilometers in radius. It was only a damaged realm, yet it could already rival Jewel's small world in terms of size. The blessed land that it was derived from had been one of the 72 blessed lands, and the vastness of blessed lands was naturally far greater than that of the 36 small worlds. This mystical realm would open once every 10 years, and only chi refiners below the golden core tier and nascent tier were allowed to enter. Meanwhile, there was no such requirement for pure martial artists. Around 200 years ago, a fortunate cultivator from circling Ascension continent had surprisingly obtained a supremely powerful pseudo-celestial tool. The cultivator had only been at the abode tier, so they had most likely thought that they couldn't hold on to that divine halberd. The pseudo-celestial tool wasn't necessarily suitable for them either. Thus, the cultivator had sold the pseudo-celestial tool to the five-weapon sect and become filthy rich in a single night. Taking advantage of their newfound wealth afterward, the cultivator had forcefully pushed themselves to the golden core tier, spending 1 grain rain coin to obtain a golden core tier cultivation base. Who wasn't envious of this? News of this had caused a huge stir in Golden Armor continent, causing hordes of chi refiners to rush to the ascending true immortal mystical realm. In the beginning, only those with a powerful background and strong network had been able to join the line. It was no longer a matter of a single grain rain coin. For 300 years, many cultivators had entered and exited the mystical realm, with all kinds of fated opportunities and immortal treasures being obtained. However, nothing was as incredible as that pseudo-celestial tool. Thus, the fervent interest in entering the ascending true immortal mystical realm gradually died down. Even so, it was still a mystical realm that cultivators felt was worthy to enter. However, Lu Tai naturally knew that the auspicious fortune of that abode tier cultivator was most likely the doing of the five-weapon sect. The five-weapon sect had very likely received guidance from some masterful businessperson. This was a similar situation to that type of makeup that was popular throughout several continents. Everything was a trick set up by those business people. Regardless, Lu Tai was well aware of the truth and lies as well as the potential of the ascending true immortal mystical realm. His master had said that if he was interested and had spare time, he could enter the mystical realm and try his luck. Perhaps he could find some crappy trinkets that were worth a small sum of money. Why had Lu Tai chosen to take the treasure-swallowing whale this time? His divination result and his Dao attainment catalyst were naturally the most important factors. However, Lu Tai was also determined to enter the ascending true immortal mystical realm and make a large sum of money. Lu Tai had initially tried his best to ask Qian Pingan to enter the ascending true immortal mystical realm with him. That way, they could explore the immortal realm and look for immortal treasures and fated opportunities together. Qian Pingan refused, and in the end he only agreed to lend another grain rain coin to Lu Tai. However, he still stubbornly refused to enter the mystical realm to try his luck. Thus, Lu Tai could only enter the ascending true immortal mystical realm by himself. Around 20 days later, he appeared travel-worn as he left the mystical realm. On the same day, he returned 3 grain rain coins to Qian Pingan, saying that the extra one was interest. After hearing Lu Tai describe his experiences in huge yield, Qian Pingan felt at ease as he accepted the grain rain coins. As it turned out, Lu Tai had used some naturalist technique to undo a restriction on an ancient immortal residence. There were more surprises than dangers on the way, and Lu Tai had almost become the new owner of the ancient immortal residence. However, due to the rules laid out by the five-weapon sect, Lu Tai had given up his control over the ancient immortal residence and made a private deal with the sect. Because of this, he had ended up with a large pile of grain rain coins. However, the intercontinental ship that belonged to the five-weapon sect needed to use lesser heat coins and grain rain coins in many areas of their intercontinental trade business, so they temporarily put this down as a debt to Lu Tai. They would pay it off within half a year, and they would even give him some additional interest. On the surface, it looked as if the five-weapon sect had made a huge loss. However, this wasn't the case. After the initially useless immortal residence was opened up by Lu Tai, the abundance of spiritual energy in the area meant that it was an ideal location for cultivation for the esteemed passengers of the treasure-swallowing whale. For example, golden core tier and nascent tier earth immortals who appeared incredibly lofty in the eyes of ordinary people would be willing to stay inside the immortal residence. This was long-term business, so the five-weapon sect wouldn't suffer a loss at all. When it came to doing business, sudden and huge profits were naturally very good. However, this type of stable income was the backbone of any lasting business. With this, Lu Tai became the third most fortunate person in the history of the ascending true immortal mystical realm. Apart from the pile of grain rain coins, Lu Tai also obtained an ancient immortal ascending technique, as well as a high-grade immortal treasure called the Mountain Illusion Pagoda. From the ancient immortal residence, Lu Tai didn't sell these two fated opportunities to the five-weapon sect. However, even though Lu Tai successfully proved that Chan Ping'an had missed a huge fated opportunity, the young boy was still largely unfazed by the revelation. He simply placed the additional grain rain coin on the table, and occasionally flipped it around when he became tired from reading. He would roll the coin around the back of his hand. To Chan Ping'an, this was a very effective way to relieve his fatigue. Its results were immediate. Lu Tai felt very vexed. He offered many sincere words in an attempt to sway Chan Ping'an, yet the young boy remained calm and steadfast the entire time. Due to this, Lu Tai never invited Chan Ping'an over every time he brewed tea. Of course, Chan Ping'an most likely didn't care about this either. Lu Tai was genuinely a very particular person. He wasn't forcing this, and it was instead a result of his upbringing. He was born in a powerful clan with a history of over 1,000 years. Not only that, but it was also an immortal clan. This wasn't something that powerful mortal clans could compare to. Thus, Lu Tai's disposition was extremely natural. It was both innate and naturally acquired. When tasting tea, the tea needed to be fresh. When brewing tea, the techniques and tea set used needed to be ancient, and the spring water added needed to be refreshing yet weighty. When drinking tea, one needed to be pure and spirited. Lu Tai had already interacted with Chan Ping'an for a while, yet he still felt like the young boy was far too pedantic and stubborn. In this sense, he was more than pure enough, yet he was nowhere near spirited enough. As a result, Chan Ping'an would still waste his good tea. Just like today, Lu Tai found another opportunity to mention his experience in the mystical realm. He concluded that money had been falling from the sky like rain, yet Chan Ping'an had run under the eaves to avoid getting hit. This was a very painful matter. However, Chan Ping'an simply remained silent as he listened. Lu Tai felt like it was truly impossible to knock this stubborn block of wood awake. Most likely deciding to give up on trying to persuade Chan Ping'an, Lu Tai finished with a casual yet sweeping and empty remark. However, worldly matters worked in such weird and wonderful manners. Not only did Chan Ping'an listen to this remark, but he even became extremely solemn and serious. Chan Ping'an, your mind is very calm when you practice fist techniques and sword techniques. This is one of your strong points. However, you have to be careful and remember that a calm mind isn't the same as a dead mind. One's mind should be as still as unmoving water, but it certainly shouldn't become a puddle of stagnant water. Lu Tai said this in a casual manner, as if this was nothing more than a bunch of nonsense. However, Chan Ping'an surprisingly stopped practicing his dull and repetitive sword stance for the first time. He sat down in front of Lu Tai and emulated his tea-drinking posture, appearing slightly awkward as he did so. Indeed, the difference between his awkwardness and Lu Tai's carefree demeanor was like the difference between dirt and clouds. He was like an old farmer from the fields trying to emulate an old scholar sitting there and discussing Tao. He could only copy Lu Tai's posture and actions in a crude manner. Lu Tai found Chan Ping'an's attempt quite amusing. The young man from the Lu clan, someone regarded as invincible in tea tasting among the younger generation in Middle-earth Divine Continent, shot a sideways glance at the uncomfortable Chan Ping'an and looked him up and down. He found this very interesting no matter how he looked at the young boy. Meanwhile, Chan Ping'an became increasingly uncomfortable and reserved under Lu Tai's gaze. Chan Ping'an longed to become a genuine scholar. This was because there was Mr. Qi Li Shisheng, and city god Shen Wen from colorful garment nation. In fact, Chan Ping'an had felt a sense of yearning even when Zhang Shanfeng had recited poems and classics on a whim. Chan Ping'an suppressed his discomfort and asked, "Are you saying that the state of my mind has become too extreme?" Lu Tai faltered upon hearing this question. As astonishingly intelligent as he was, He didn't answer Qian Ping'an's question in a perfunctory manner. He didn't dare to jump to conclusions either. If it were some other ordinary person, Lu Tai could make up some casual nonsense or simply offer a response that was neither correct nor incorrect. However, he couldn't do this today. The two of them sat opposite each other, with a serious expression on Qian Ping'an's face and a wry smile in Lu Tai's mind. Lu Tai had seemingly drawn a cage for himself. However, a thought suddenly occurred to Lu Tai, and he immediately became a little adrift. It was arriving this early? He initially thought that the buds of this opportunity would only appear after they arrived in Parasol Leaf Continent and experienced many adventures and challenges together. Yet, it suddenly arrived without any warning, catching him by complete surprise. Lu Tai calmed himself down, steadying his breathing and focusing his mind. He solemnly handed Qian Ping'an a cup of tea and said, "Drink it slowly. I'll talk about some of my views after you finish." Qian Ping'an was unaware of the deeper considerations behind this, and he simply treated this as an ordinary conversation between two people where one was asking questions and one was answering. He nodded and accepted the cup of tea, drinking a small sip. After experiencing the perilous calamity on Osmanthus Island, Qian Ping'an had come across that old boatman who had admired and loved Lady Gui for many hundreds of years. He was the first boatman for Osmanthus Island, and he was also Lu Chen's only servant before the former ascended from the world. He and Lu Chen had traveled across the seas and journeyed all around the world. Back then, Qian Ping'an had experienced a strange dream where he had entered a book and finished reading it in a single night. Afterward, he had conversed with the old boatman in the small world that the latter had created with a single wave of his hand. In the end, the old boatman had surprisingly exclaimed, "Don't try to ruin my great Tao." At the time, Qian Ping'an had been roughly comparing the notion of reason to the two ends of a ruler. He felt like the old boatman's reasons had gone to an extreme. They appeared reasonable on the surface, yet they were in fact unreasonable. This was because they weren't complete enough. They failed to adhere to the concept of the mean one, described in the books. Meanwhile, the root of Taoism was described by the phrase, "The Tao follows nature." Thus, Qian Ping'an could vaguely recall someone telling him something when he had read the book in his dream. The principles of Confucianism never existed in lofty and unreachable places. It wasn't important how lofty these principles were, and it was only important whether these principles could be applied in real life. That person had even smiled and said that the knowledge of the paramount sage of Confucianism was already profound and lofty to an unknown degree. Yet, after discussing Tao one time, he had sighed with emotion while having a private conversation with a disciple. In fact, there had even been a sense of shame in his voice. The paramount sage had said that a certain person's Tao was truly lofty, yet, Qian Ping'an's question today naturally wasn't a form of discussing Tao. Qian Ping'an wasn't thinking so deeply. Since starting to practice fist techniques, and after beginning to read books, had Qian Ping'an truly never considered his own future before? This was naturally not possible. He had a 60-year promise with Big Sister Immortal, and he now had a 10-year promise with Ning Yao. After his 2 long journeys, even Qian Ping'an's initial belief of "my punch needs to be the quickest" had changed to "my punch can be quicker, but it must contain the most reason." One of Qian Ping'an's most significant remarks had come in an inn during his trip back to the small town. At that time, perhaps even his audience hadn't paid much attention to his words. He had said to the little girl in pink and the little boy in azure, "You guys have to tell me if I do anything wrong." From that point onward, Qian Ping'an was always questioning himself in a formless manner, regardless of how many punches the old man in the bamboo building launched onto his physical body and soul, and regardless of anything else. However, this was a necessary step. Pertaining to his mind's realm, or in other words, his intangible true conscience, Qian Ping'an had also uttered a remark that had already laid bare some critical secret. That was his remark to Ning Yao's parents in Stalactite Mountain. Qian Ping'an's remark had reflected his continual self-questioning and self-disapproval. "I didn't do well enough." Not doing well enough is the same as being wrong. How many people in the world would hold themselves to such incredibly strict standards? However, this mentality hadn't formed in a mysterious and unexplainable manner. Rather, starting from the moment that the young boy's bonded porcelain was shattered, then to all of the pains and hardships that he experienced, And then to all of his chance encounters and fated opportunities, Qian Ping'an had been forced to piece together his mind's realm in such a manner. This was an unintentional yet destined process. If he succeeded, then it would be as if the sun and moon were shining bright in the same sky, a remarkable phenomenon that would steal luster from the stars. If he failed, then he would likely break all of his promises and cause all kinds of disappointment. A person would starve to death if they didn't eat. In the same vein, a person would also tend toward death if their mind completely dried up. It was just that they would be completely unaware of this. If they didn't die today, then they would die next year and so on. It was as simple as that. Fighting to stay alive, battling through perilous situations, rising with fury, and soaring upward with vigor. Yet, silently begging for death, eating and drinking uncontrollably, failing to act in moderation, succumbing to the 7 emotions and 6 desires, having wild thoughts and all kinds of other detrimental habits. These were all the peculiarities of a person's mind. The human mind was complicated. It was a profound existence that even sages didn't dare to claim that they could fully understand. For example, why had Cui Chan lost in the small town? Following this path in his mind, the mind's realm of Qian Ping'an became extremely clear. It was his mistake that had almost killed Lu Xianyang. Thus, so be it if he, Qian Ping'an, had been killed in the end. After expounding the reason that others weren't willing to listen to, so be it if he were killed once and for all. Even when it came to the death of that feminine man in the dragon kiln, Qian Ping'an had simply refused to accept his box of makeup. Yet he still felt like he was wrong. When a person truly started to recognize and understand the world around them, after seeing lofty mountains that towered into the clouds, winding rivers that stretched endlessly into the distance, all kinds of profound and magnificent sights, and even the carefree nature of scholars, after seeing the official residences and garb that symbolize the dignity of an empire, the impermanent nature of birth, aging, disease, and death, and the seemingly heroic yet realistically cold-blooded formations of heavy cavalry. Very often, there would come some point in time when one would arrive at the sudden realization that they were actually so minute and insignificant. This kind of feeling was most likely a very lonely one. It was very difficult to empathize with grief, while the sharing of joy often disappeared in a flash. Life was filled with moments of farewell. In reality, Qian Ping'an was filled with fear as he faced this world. However, Lu Xianyang, Li Baoping, and Guqin wouldn't feel. They wouldn't feel the same as Qian Ping'an. Guqin was intent on exacting revenge. Li Baoping felt like there were always interesting things in the world to explore. She would always immerse herself in the colorful and spectacular world inside her mind. She almost never questioned herself. Nor would she readily rebuke herself. It was because of this that she had remarked, "How can there be a junior uncle who doesn't like Li Baoping?" Meanwhile, Lu Xianyang would speak from the bottom of his heart when he stated that he wanted to see taller mountains and witness larger rivers, and that he definitely wouldn't die of old age in a small place like their hometown. However, Qian Ping'an was different. He might do many things, such as accompanying Li Baoping and the others to Great Sui Nation, yet the projection of his mind's realm would go into hiding. Generally speaking, Qian Ping'an's mind and thoughts would be unmoving. During the many years that he worked in the dragon kiln, the young boy always sought to stabilize his movements. In reality, he was stubbornly seeking to stabilize his mind. If Qian Ping'an's mind wasn't stable, he would detest Song Jisun for being rich. He would become jealous of him having a companion to rely on and live with, and he would be envious that he could read. This was why Ruan Qiong didn't view Qian Ping'an as someone walking the same path as him, even if he weren't prejudiced against the young boy. This was the root cause behind why Ruan Qiong was unwilling to take Qian Ping'an as his disciple. This was also the reason why Lu Tai felt like Qian Ping'an wasn't spirited enough. Thus, when the sword spirit had seen the mind's realm of the young boy back then, what she had seen was a little child guarding 2 graves and a mountain. What she had seen was a pair of straw sandals on his feet. His only movement had been his pursuit of some person's figure toward the south. Indeed, that figure had actually been Ningyao flying away on her sword. And thus, compared to his deep apprehension and extreme caution when traveling to Great Sui Nation, Qian Ping'an had finally discovered a sense of independent will when deciding to deliver the sword to the young girl whom he loved. "It's my will to embark on this journey through the cultivation world. I, Qian Ping'an, want to do something for myself." As a result, even though he was envious of Old Dragon City's fan heir, and another weight was added to his shoulders after he visited the Sword Qi Great Wall. Qian Ping'an's mind instead became lighter and more relaxed than before. Thus, Qian Ping'an changed out of his straw sandals and pulled on a new robe. He wanted to become a sword immortal. He wanted to become a great sword immortal who could carve characters on the Sword Qi Great Wall. From someone who only dared to buy 5 mountains and immediately loan 3 out. From someone who wanted to give all of his possessions to Lu Xianying who had left the small town. From someone who had given almost half of his high-grade snake gall pebbles to the little boy in azure and the little girl in pink during the new year. And from someone who believed that he should hurriedly give all of his treasures away to those whom he cared about since he couldn't stop himself from losing them. From all of this to the Qian Ping'an today, there had already been huge and monumental changes. None of this had been easy. Back then, why had the drunk old scholar furiously smacked Qian Ping'an's head and exclaimed that youths definitely needed to drink? This was because the old scholar had immediately discovered the issue with the young boy's mind with a single glance. Young people shouldn't have been like that. When extreme stillness begot movement, young people should shake off their burdens and enjoy the beautiful moments of their youth in a carefree manner. When it came to such principles in the world, however, hearing them and understanding them was one matter, while acting upon them was another matter altogether. The principles that came from books and from beyond the books were even more difficult to apply in a proper manner. Qian Ping'an slowly drank the tea sip by sip. Just as Lu Tai was about to give an answer, Qian Ping'an suddenly opened his mouth and said, "I'm not familiar with you, and I even lent you money again and again because I was unwilling to interact with you. I was even more unwilling to enter the ascending true immortal mystical realm with you. In reality, the reason for all of this is very simple. It's because I'm afraid of death." Back in his hometown, he had faced Kai Jinjian, Fu Nanhua, and the mountain-moving ape in succession. In Qian Ping'an's mind, he had essentially died once already. In the Flood Dragon Trench, he had essentially died a second time. The same mistake shouldn't be made 3 times. Qian Ping'an slowly put down his empty teacup and continued with a smile. "It doesn't matter whether you believe me or not, but I've never been able to obtain valuable things that require an element of luck." As if speaking to himself, Qian Ping'an mused, "I gave it some thought just then, and I feel like I might have been correct before. If I continue on now, however, then that will be incorrect. I need to slowly change myself if I want to walk further down the path of cultivation in the future." There was a strange and slightly solemn expression on Lu Tai's face. Just then, he had actually been using an untaught mind-observing secret technique from the Lu clan to peep at the realm inside Qian Ping'an's mind. Qian Ping'an lifted his teacup and asked, "Can I have another cup? Do you think you're drinking wine?" Lu Tai replied with a huff. However, he still poured another cup of tea for Qian Ping'an. Qian Ping'an continued to reveal his thoughts, saying, "However, I feel like I wasn't wrong to turn down your offer to go to the ascending true immortal mystical realm together. If I went with you, perhaps I would have affected your fortune and made it such that you couldn't obtain any money or rare treasures. Now, however, you've made a huge fortune and I've also earned 3 grain rain coins. This is fairly good." Lu Tai was no longer drinking tea anymore, and he placed his hands on his knees and chuckled. "You lent me 2 of the grain rain coins, so you actually only earned a single one." Qian Ping'an hesitated for a moment before honestly replying, "I feel like I earned 3. Lu Tai didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Qian Ping'an had never expected him to return the grain rain coins. Qian Ping'an drank the tea that he definitely couldn't determine the quality of and said in a quiet voice, "One needs to leave some room. A missed opportunity is a missed opportunity. One can't hope to achieve perfection and earn the biggest bounty in all matters. Lu Tai, what do you think?" Lu Tai was taken aback. However, he immediately chortled with laughter and exclaimed, "Qian Ping'an, you're actually hiding from that one for?" Qian Ping'an sipped some tea. He was very confused. Lu Tai's laughter was suddenly replaced by fury, and he leaned forward slightly and snatched the teacup from Qian Ping'an's hand. He then casually flicked his sleeve and put away all of the tea utensils and tea set. He angrily stood up and shot a vicious glare at Qian Ping'an, shouting, "Observing Tao on the ascending sun platform. Who's the one observing Tao? And who's the one becoming a noble in Parasol Leaf Continent? You know all of this already. What am I, a measly noble from Parasol Leaf Continent, worth? What a huge loss." Lu Tai was fuming as he noisily made his way upstairs. The steps thudded loudly under his heavy footsteps. Chen Ping'an scratched his head in utter confusion. He had no idea what was going on. For a long time after this, Chen Ping'an's situation became quite pitiful. Lu Tai reverted back to dressing as a woman. Not only did he dress himself up in a beautiful and seductive manner, but he even acted coquettishly in front of Chen Ping'an on purpose. He would deliberately go down to the first floor to discuss Chen Ping'an every single day. No matter how good-tempered Chen Ping'an was, he still couldn't stand Lu Tai's incessant orchid fingers and purposeful flirting. He couldn't stand the beautiful young man continually making eyes at him and speaking in a cutesy and mellow manner. And so, there eventually came one morning when Chen Ping'an threw a single punch and knocked Lu Tai into Emerald Lake, while he was sitting on the corridor railings and humming a tune. Lu Tai furiously leaped out from the water, completely drenched from head to toe. He forcefully suppressed his urge to summon Needle Tip and Wheat On, his two bonded flying swords, to stab Chen Ping'an to death. He ultimately managed to stop himself, yet he still couldn't resist hurling a torrent of abuse at the young boy. Was this any way to treat his semi-Dao mentor? Did Chen Ping'an still have a conscience? However, Lu Tai was clearly lacking confidence when he mentioned the fact that he was Chen Ping'an's semi-Dao mentor. Even so, he was filled with confidence and vigor when he scolded Chen Ping'an as heartless and lacking conscience. After this incident, Lu Tai no longer paid any attention to Chen Ping'an. Time slowly flowed by. It was dawn when the treasure-swallowing whale arrived at the ferry station located at Parasol Leaf Continent's Planchette Writing Sect, and Chen Ping'an walked up to the third floor to remind Lu Tai that it was time to disembark. However, the third floor was already empty. Chen Ping'an didn't think much about this. Lu Tai was truly a strange person. Walking by himself, Chen Ping'an went from the treasure-swallowing whale under the sea to Parasol Leaf Continent on land. Chen Ping'an stepped onto the ferry station and stomped his feet. This was just like when he had gone from Clay Vase Alley to Fortune Street for the first time all those years ago. He had gone from a dirty mud path to a path paved from bluestone slabs. This was a very fresh experience. Chen Ping'an felt like things were quite good without Lu Tai by his side. Of course, thinking was a bit unfair toward that beautiful young man. Just as Chen Ping'an's light and carefree footsteps carried him forward, he saw a familiar figure near the bustling shops in the ferry station. Chen Ping'an instantly bared his teeth and grimaced. Wearing an azure robe and a jade hairpin, Lu Tai was currently squatting by the street and nibbling on a meat bun. After seeing Chen Ping'an, he turned his head and glanced at the dog squatting beside him. The dog was also looking at Lu Tai with an eager expression. Upon seeing this, Lu Tai tossed one of his meat buns to the dog squatting on the street beside him. While doing this, he even raised an eyebrow at Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an walked over, and Lu Tai continued to nibble on the meat bun that had thin skin and succulent fillings. He was bobbing his head back and forth in a very punchable manner. Chen Ping'an bent down and stroked the dog's head. He then directly rewarded Lu Tai with a kick that Lu Tai fell onto his bum. Fortunately, he didn't drop the meat bun in his hand. After kicking him for no reason, Chen Ping'an was actually still smiling. He claimed that he was afraid of death, so why was he completely unafraid of death when it came to him, esteemed Lu? Did Chen Ping'an genuinely think that Needle Tip and Wheat On were as useless as his abandoned boxes of makeup? Lu Tai suddenly felt a little gloomy. This was because he just remembered that Chen Ping'an was completely unaware of the existence of his two bonded flying swords. Lu Tai stood up and viciously chomped down on the meat bun. After finishing it, he warned, "That punch in the treasure-swallowing whale and that kick just now, it's already been 2 times. The same mistake can't be made 3 times, Chen Ping'an replied with a smile. "If you dare to repeat the same mistake 3 times, then I'll either bash you to death or I'll change back into female clothes and disgust you to death," Lu Tai said in a scathing voice. Chen Ping'an immediately raised his arms and put his hands together, pretending to make a vow to the heavens. However, what he said was, "If there's a 3rd time, then please choose the first option and bash me to death." Seeing that Lu Tai had no intention of dwelling on this matter, Chen Ping'an looked up and gazed at a tall and majestic mountain in the distance. A sea of clouds obstructed his view starting from the waist of the mountain. This prevented people from seeing the scenery atop the mountain. It was said that there were only a few times each year when one could witness the full appearance of the mountain. During these times, One could lay their eyes upon the vast expanse of temples, halls, and pagodas that rested at the peak of the majestic mountain. There was a description of planchette writing sect in the Mountain and Sea Chronicle, amid which there were 2 points that left a very deep impression on Chan Ping'an. Just like Mount Longhu's heavenly master residence, planchette writing sect didn't belong to any of the 3 branches of Taoism. It specialized in immortals asking questions, true immortals bestowing knowledge. To put it simply, planchette writing sect was similar to Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Wind Snow Temple and True Martial Mountain in the sense that disciples could summon higher powers to help them. The only difference was whether one was summoning deities or true immortals. In addition, planchette writing sect raised many spirits and ghosts in its territory. It was unrivaled in Parasol Leaf Continent, and there was a sky-calling street at the waist of the mountain that contained all kinds of peculiar and bizarre matters. Chan Ping'an had always been very interested in those lively and adorable little spirits. Thus, he planned to broaden his horizons in planchette writing sect. If this were in the past, he would have only thought about this but not acted upon it. Now, however, he was genuinely willing to act upon his desire. Moreover, carrying the sword lasting qi on his back, there would be wisps of slightly shuddering sword qi whenever Chan Ping'an traveled north. This would shake Chan Ping'an's soul. However, the sword qi would remain still if Chan Ping'an traveled south. This caused Chan Ping'an to breathe a sigh of relief. After all, traveling north would at least bring him closer and closer to Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Lu Tai raised both hands in approval regarding Chan Ping'an's desire to visit Sky Calling Street. He commented that the small trinkets there were not only precious and rare, but they were also very fair in terms of price. This was a place that Qi refiners definitely needed to visit when they traveled to Parasol Leaf Continent. Walking toward a distant mountain could tire one to death. The majestic mountain looked quite close, yet there was actually a huge distance to cover if one wanted to travel toward it on foot. However, Chan Ping'an was no longer an amateur who had just set foot into the cultivation world. He occasionally glanced at the towering mountain shrouded in clouds and mists as he walked forward, and was keenly aware of just how powerful planchette writing sect was. If it were placed in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, it would only be slightly weaker than Divine Edict sect. Located in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent, planchette writing sect was a sect-level force, signifying that it had at least one cultivator at the unpolished jade tier. Moreover, compared to the smallest Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, the immortal forces in Parasol Leaf Continent possess greater influence and stronger foundations. There was also Parasol Leaf sect and Jade Tablet sect to the south and north, respectively, occupying the 2 ends of the continent. It was as if they each possessed half of Parasol Leaf Continent's fortune. Thus, sects that were still able to rise to the top and make a name for themselves in Parasol Leaf Continent were often powerful forces that had left a trail of blood and destruction in their wake. Bored and with nothing better to do, Lu Tai started to tell Chan Ping'an about the differences between Parasol Leaf Continent and Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's cultures and customs. Eastern Treasured Vile Continent was a small place, so if it wasn't for Divine Edict sects Qi Zhan advancing to the 12th tier, the Immortal tier, and being bestowed the title of Heavenly Lord by their superior sect in Middle-earth Divine Continent, there wouldn't have been a single Immortal tier cultivator in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, at least not on the surface. A while ago, Chan Ping'an had seen a bounty for the Great Li Empire Song Chongjing on that wall in Stalactite Mountain's Taoist Saber Room. The reason given was because Eastern Treasured Vile Continent wasn't worthy of having an 11th tier martial artist. In fact, this reason was both funny and not funny at the same time. Looking at Parasol Leaf Continent, on the other hand, the most powerful cultivators in Parasol Leaf sect and Jade Tablet sect were all old geezers who had advanced to the Immortal tier hundreds of years ago. Planchette writing sect also had 2 cultivators at the unpolished Jade tier, 1 male and 1 female. They were Tao partners and they were truly the envy of everyone. It was said that the bustling Sky Calling Street only existed in the planchette writing sect because that female cultivator at the unpolished Jade tier was fond of raising spirits. Even after becoming an Earth Immortal back then, she was still willing to frequent the markets and show her face in front of other people. She would especially leave the mountain to purchase all kinds of spirits. Since this was the case, the sect leader of planchette writing sect had decided to wave his hand and spend all of his personal wealth to build the Sky Calling Street, for no other reason than to please his Tao partner. This way she wouldn't need to travel too far away. There was a look of intoxication and yearning on Lu Tai's face as he talked about the romance between the two powerful cultivators. Chen Ping'an's hair stood on end. This was because he didn't know whether Lu Tai was imagining himself as the sect leader of Planchette Writing Sect, or as the sect leader's female Dao partner. Afterward, most likely because he was feeling sentimental, Lu Tai started to tirelessly explain those feminine matters to Chen Ping'an even though he was still dressed as a wealthy young master. He talked about plum blossom makeup, forehead decorations, blusher, the different types of powder in terms of their color, and how they should be applied, the clothing preferences of celestial maidens in Middle Earth divine continent compared to other continents, the pros and cons of heavy makeup versus light makeup, and so on and so forth. After enduring this for a long time, Chen Ping'an finally couldn't listen to Lu Tai's seemingly endless barrage of feminine talk anymore. He turned to the handsome young man and said with a serious expression, "Lu Tai, I'm begging you, I don't want to listen to you talking about these things. In any case, listening to these things isn't useful at all." Chen Ping'an had only said something similar to this one time before, and that was to Ma Kuxuan before their big battle in the street. Back then, Ma Kuxuan had been spouting a heap of nonsense without any signs of stopping. However, his feelings toward Ma Kuxuan were that of disgust and loathing. It was incredibly rare for Chen Ping'an to detest someone so much. Zhu Lu, the young girl who had attempted to assassinate him, could be counted as one. The female ghost in the bright red wedding dress who had wantonly killed people could be counted as another. The elderly golden flood dragon in the flood dragon trench could also be counted among this group. Meanwhile, his feelings toward Lu Tai were rather those of exasperation and helplessness. Lu Tai raised an eyebrow before saying in a heartbroken voice, "Not useful? Isn't there a girl whom you like? In the 1 in 10,000 chance there is, then don't you want to see her become even more beautiful? In the 9,999 in 10,000 chance there isn't, then you can at least use this information as a topic of conversation with other girls. Do you genuinely think that celestial maidens don't have mortal desires and don't care about beauty at all? You deserve to be single." Chen Ping'an suddenly attained enlightenment, and his voice was firm as he replied, "There is a girl. I do want her to become even more beautiful." There was naturally a girl whom he liked, and he naturally wanted her to become even more beautiful. No, Ning Yao was already the most beautiful. Lu Tai shook his head upon seeing this. What a stupid boy. I surmise that you won't be able to maintain your relationship, even if you do have one. After saying this, Lu Tai was still unwilling to let the matter go. He summoned his bamboo folding fan from thin air and clicked his tongue in wonder, remarking, "You won't be able to maintain it, won't be able to maintain it." Chen Ping'an chuckled coldly in reply. Detecting signs that Chen Ping'an was about to get physical again, Lu Tai shot a sideways glance at the young boy and warned, "Don't you dare to get physical, okay? You're reading books every day, so even if you're not a noble scholar, you're still at least half a scholar. Just how far have we walked? Didn't you say that you wouldn't make the same mistake 3 times? The ferry station they had arrived at was also part of Planchette Writing Sect's territory. As they walked toward the mountain where the main structures of the sect were located, they came across many interesting and strange sights along the way. There were a dozen or so people riding a large purple python that slithered as quickly as wind and lightning. However, its passengers were still able to enjoy a smooth and stable ride. Meanwhile, bursts of light that were filled with sword chi continued to frequently whiz past above their heads, coming and going in a flash. After traveling to Old Dragon City and Stalactite Mountain, Chen Ping'an was already unsurprised by these incredible scenes. Lu Tai explained that Parasol Leaf Continent was very different from Eastern Treasured Vial Continent, which had countless small forces. There weren't many forces in the mountains here, yet most of the ones that existed were supremely powerful behemoths. In this continent, one couldn't call oneself the king of the mountain simply by stabbing a tattered flag on its peak. One shouldn't underestimate the cultivation forces and mortal empires in Parasol Leaf Continent. Of course, nothing was absolute. Parasol Leaf Continent was truly too large, after all, so there definitely existed small and weak immortal forces as well. In any case, which piece of land didn't have nests of rats? In Eastern Treasured Vial Continent that lay to the south of Lakeview Academy, almost every empire and nation was brimming with a large number of immortal forces. This was most definitely not the case in Parasol Leaf Continent. The two of them walked side by side on one side of the wide street. In fact, they were especially eye-catching. So many females passing by in carriages would look at them with expressions of curiosity, regardless of whether they were immortals or wealthy mortals. There was slight amazement on their faces, and this was mostly thanks to the graceful Lu Tai. His immortal aura and bookish appearance were truly very rare and outstanding. Meanwhile, Qian Ping'an was like an ordinary leaf highlighting the beauty of the blossoming flower. Lu Tai couldn't help but sigh with emotion and say, "There's no need to say too much about Southern World Continent. It's extremely powerful, its scholarly culture is flourishing, and there are also boundless cultivators. This is especially the case since they have Chan Chunan from the pure Confucian Chan clan guarding the continent. Parasol Leaf Continent where we are right now prefers peace and quiet. It's like a virtuous female who stands aloof from worldly affairs. At the same time, this continent has a geographical advantage in the sense that it's very difficult to reach. Few intercontinental ships come and go from this continent. Because of this, Parasol Leaf Continent tends to be resistant to outside influence. In fact, Parasol Leaf Continent can be regarded as a very large paradise away from the world. In comparison, circling Ascension Continent to the southwest is much more lively. There's no clear line between the mountains and the ordinary cultivation world, and people are fighting and killing each other all the time. Even chi refiners possess a strong aura that's usually unique to those in the cultivation world. Lu Tai, what's your cultivation base? Can you say? Qian Ping'an suddenly asked in a quiet voice. Lu Tai gently rocked his folding fan, causing his hair to flow in the wind as he replied with a faint smile. Descendants of the Lu clan don't care too much about their cultivation base. They only care about how far their river observation eye can see. Qian Ping'an nodded and said, "Then it's not very high." Lu Tai pursed his lips and replied, "Compared to the cultivation prodigies in Middle Earth Divine Continent, my cultivation base is naturally not very high. Compared to you, however, it's more than high enough." Qian Ping'an smiled and revealed, "I'm acquainted with someone who's slightly older than me, and he's a 7th-tier martial artist. Back in my hometown, I came across a sword cultivator from Southern World Continent who looked like a fox. I think he was at the 9th tier. There are also 2 little children staying at my home, with one of them being a fire python and one of them being a water snake. I presume they're almost about to reach the 6th or 7th tier. So what about you? What's your cultivation base?" Even after hearing this, Lu Tai was still unwilling to disclose his cultivation base to Qian Ping'an. Instead, he put on a smug expression and gloated, "I have 2 masters, one who taught me knowledge and one who taught me Tao. They're both at the upper 5 tiers. "I see," Qian Ping'an replied. Lu Tai shot a glance at Qian Ping'an and asked, "What do you mean you see? Are you unwilling to concede? Or perhaps that's still too weak for you?" "I concede," Qian Ping'an answered with a nod. Lu Tai smiled with squinted eyes and said, "Qian Ping'an, what's with your perfunctory response? You're clearly not conceding at all. Perhaps you want to be laid down and honored with a few cups of wine." "What's that supposed to mean?" Qian Ping'an asked with a perplexed expression. Lu Tai closed his folding fan with a snap and explained, "After a person dies, people will naturally go to their grave and honor them with wine." "Such a twisted mind," Qian Ping'an said with a huff. Lu Tai laughed delightfully and opened his folding fan again, sending gusts of refreshing breeze toward his handsome face. What a beautiful day this was. The two of them walked for half a day, and they only arrived at the foot of the mountain when twilight set in. This mountain owned by Planchette Writing Sect was called Hanging Garment Mountain, and according to Lu Tai's explanation, this symbolized a ruler maintaining order with their hands cupped and their sleeves hanging. However, why was the name of this mountain inspired by a Confucian notion? Lu Tai was unable to offer any explanation. Another 2 hours passed, and it was already dusk when Qian Ping'an and Lu Tai finally saw Sky Calling Street in the distance. The street was brightly lit, making it seem as if it were day. Even though it was already night, there were still streams of visitors bustling around. After walking onto the large street teeming with people, Lu Tai and Qian Ping'an were able to witness what it meant to spend money like pouring water, spend a fortune with a single wave of a hand, whoever blinked first becoming the loser, and so on. Sure enough, Sky Calling Street was brimming with peculiar and wonderful things. Qian Ping'an found this to be a very eye-opening experience, and the first shop they entered, Lu Tai purchased 2 small spirits that Qian Ping'an had never even heard of before. One was called Pupil, and according to the near obsequious introduction by the shopkeeper, Qian Ping'an learned that one could raise this spirit in their pupil. Not only could this spirit absorb some spiritual energy of heaven and earth every day, but more importantly, it could help its owner brighten their eyes when it saw breathtakingly beautiful individuals. Many qi refiners who practiced immortal techniques relating to the eye were most fond of this kind of spirit. After spending a whopping 800 snowflake coins to purchase this spirit, Lu Tai announced that he was going to give it to Qian Ping'an as a present. However, Qian Ping'an naturally turned down this act of goodwill. Seeing this, Lu Tai could only shake his head in pity, asking, "Qian Ping'an, don't you want your vision to improve every day?" The implied question to Qian Ping'an was this. With Lu Tai in front of him, and with this pupil in his eye, wouldn't looking at Lu Tai be equivalent to cultivating his vision? The old shopkeeper glanced at the extraordinarily handsome Lu Tai before turning his gaze to Qian Ping'an. There was an amused and meaningful smile on his face. A layer of goosebumps appeared on Qian Ping'an's body, and he pretended that he didn't understand anything at all. Compared to the pupil that Lu Tai had purchased, Qian Ping'an was actually more interested in the miniature spirits that were running around in a lively manner beside it. They were as small as grains of rice, and this species of spirits was called ear, a homonym with ear. They lived in a person's ear, and they would use their owner's eardrum as a literal drum. When their owner went to sleep, they would quietly beat their owner's eardrum in a manner that couldn't be heard by their owner or anyone else. However, this act could magnify the yang energy of their owner, formlessly deterring the many sinister spirits and ghosts that wandered around during the night. This was a type of spirit that wealthy clans from outside the mountains definitely had to purchase if they were haunted by ghosts or accidentally possessed by evil spirits. Because of their lowly cultivation base, many qi refiners at the lower 5 tiers would also bring such a spirit along with them if they needed to travel through mountain forests or lakes and marshes. When its owner fell asleep, this spider would spin a small web above their head, one that was colorful and dazzling. Afterward, their owner would enjoy a dream filled with wealth and intimacy. Because of this, many immortal forces used intimate dream spiders as a tool to temper their disciples' Tao hearts. At the same time, teachings and forces that advocated dual cultivation also viewed intimate dream spiders as a necessary item. In a row of small cages near the intimate dream spider, there were many other species of spiders, including the nightmare spider, which was pitch black like ink. Each type of spider had its own unique appearance and ability. Qian Ping'an naturally didn't like these kinds of creatures. However, Lu Tai happened to like these spiders very much. Indeed, he had spent 600 snowflake coins simply because he thought the appearance of the intimate dream spider was very adorable. And thus, the old shopkeeper's smile became even more amused and meaningful. Afterward, Lu Tai got into a bidding war with a cultivator at the middle 5 tiers in front of some stall. This was a rare sight, yet Qian Ping'an didn't blame Lu Tai for being reckless this time. Instead, he felt like that item was well worth the 12 lesser heat coins that Lu Tai had spent. In the end, Lu Tai had only managed to win the bidding war because his opponent hadn't had enough immortal money on him. Moreover, Lu Tai had been exuding an air of confidence, making it seem as if he would fight to the end no matter how many times his opponent raised the bid. The cultivator at the middle 5 tiers had eventually muttered curses and left. There was an incredibly rare mutton fat beast, happily jumping around in Lu Tai's palm. The body of the small beast was jade-like, and this was because it was formed from the essence of beautiful jade. Its body was innately a high-grade natural treasure, making it an optimal choice to forge talismanic jade tablets with. However, mutton fat beasts were extremely fiery and unyielding, so once they grew up and matured, they would choose to commit suicide once they were caught. In other words, one couldn't capture and raise mature mutton fat beasts. Meanwhile, the mutton fat beast in Lu Tai's palm had been unintentionally caught by a cultivator, and it had only managed to survive and avoid death by suicide because it was still young. If it were properly raised, it could potentially become a living treasure that was worth an exorbitant amount of money. However, there was a catch in the sense that raising a mutton fat beast would cost even more than the initial price of buying one. This was because mutton fat beasts only ate snowflake coins. The stall owner was an ordinary-looking woman. After Lu Tai purchased the mutton-fat beast, she smiled and said that such a valuable beast would have definitely been purchased at a high price right away if it weren't for the fact that Planchette Writing Sect already owned a pair of mutton-fat beasts. Chen Pingyan and Lu Tai walked left and right along the bustling Sky-Calling Street, entering and exiting numerous shops. During this time, Chen Pingyan had also taken a fancy to 3 items. However, he had been struck with indecision, and he had ultimately been reluctant to spend so much money. There was a 3-legged golden toad that was a spirit beast belonging to heaven and earth. It was said that its owner could increase their fortune in making money. There was a silver-white treasure-seeking mouse whose sense of smell was extremely sensitive to spiritual matters in the world. There was also a small creature called the wine insect, and this was a creature that could only be born in high-quality aged wine. If this insect were placed in a newly fermented pot of wine, then the pot of wine would become as rich as one that was stored for several years after just a few hours. Thus, these kinds of wine insects were naturally adored by those who liked to drink wine. Chen Pingyan didn't spend any money, yet Lu Tai continued to spend money without pause. He purchased a dragon whisker carp that was the size of a palm. This creature had the body of a carp, yet it also had 2 long whiskers that were identical to those belonging to flood dragons. These whiskers were a type of rare natural treasure. However, they were naturally far inferior to the 2 golden flood dragon whiskers that Chen Pingyan had obtained and forged into a demon-binding chain. The advantage of dragon whisker carp was the fact that they could be bred and raised. In other words, an immortal force could potentially purchase several of these carp and carefully raise them and breed them. After hundreds upon thousands of years, the immortal force would have an entire pond of dragon whisker carp. Lu Tai also purchased a bull roar fish. Its body was only as long as a person's finger, yet it could unleash a roar that was as loud as thunder. Chen Pingyan couldn't fathom why Lu Tai had purchased this fish. Perhaps he was going to use it to frighten someone? In the end, Chen Pingyan also saw a collection of talisman paper humans in a shop at the end of the street. They came in varying styles and colors, and they also commanded a varying range of prices. These talisman paper humans were roughly divided into 3 categories according to height. Those that were 1 finger tall, 1 palm tall, or 1 arm tall. They were extremely lifelike, and they were capable of cleaning courtyards, raising flowers and birds, helping to move books and basque books, and so on. Paper humans were also divided into different grades. Moreover, this notion of grades was a very popular one among wealthy clans in the world. Because of this, the cultivation base, renown, and force affiliation of the talisman's author had a huge influence on the final price. Of course, the quality of the talisman paper was also quite important. There were immortal forces and subordinate businesses that specialized in crafting talisman paper humans, and this was a business where profits were very high. Even though Chen Pingyan found these miniature paper humans extremely amusing and fun, he definitely wouldn't go as far as to purchase one. This was because they were very expensive. They weren't worth the price, and they also provided no value. They couldn't be further away from the ideal of cheap and useful. Meanwhile, Lu Tai purchased a large stack of talisman paper humans in a single go, all of them belonging to the shortest category. Having spent another 500 snowflake coins, Lu Tai said that he could get these paper humans to stage mock battles on the table when he became bored. That would definitely cure his boredom. When it came to spending money, there was definitely no possibility of mutual understanding and conversation between Chen Pingyan and Lu Tai. If one continued past Sky-Calling Street for 1 to 2 kilometers, one would come across a pavilion named the Cease-Walking Pavilion. This signified that those from outside Planchette Writing Sect should stop here and not proceed forward. Chen Pingyan and the fully loaded Lu Tai walked into the Cease-Walking Pavilion together. While walking over, Chen Pingyan couldn't help but steal a few extra glances at Lu Tai. He was extremely curious about where Lu Tai had put those spirits and creatures. Lu Tai did indeed own pocket treasures, and it was indeed okay to put goods like the talisman paper humans inside. However, living spirits and creatures with yang energy most definitely couldn't be placed inside pocket treasures. Otherwise, they would explode apart and potentially even cause the pocket treasure to shatter. Chen Pingyan and Lu Tai rested in the pavilion for a short while, taking in the night scenery surrounding Planchette Writing Sect from a distance. Afterward, the two of them returned to Sky-Calling Street and looked for a nearby inn to stay the night. However, this resulted in the two of them directly parting ways. This was because Lu Tai wanted to stay in an immortal residence brimming with spiritual energy. Meanwhile, Qian Pingyan naturally wanted to find any old inn to stay in, as long as the price was right. An uneventful night passed by. It was very difficult to cause trouble right under the nose of Planchette writing sect. Of course, this was given that one didn't provoke those haughty disciples from Planchette writing sect. Qian Pingyan and Lu Tai agreed to meet up at the Cease Walking Pavilion in the morning. They would then leave the mountain and continue to travel north. Qian Pingyan arrived at the pavilion very early in the morning, allowing him to enjoy the spectacular sight of the sun rising above the East Sea. However, there was still no sign of Lu Tai even when the sun had risen high. After waiting for so long, Qian Pingyan was just about to leave the pavilion to look for Lu Tai. However, it was only at this moment that the handsome young man finally strolled up the mountain while yawning in sleepiness. He waved at Qian Pingyan before stopping in his tracks, unwilling to walk any further. In any case, walking any further would be a complete waste of his energy. Qian Pingyan sighed and walked out of the pavilion, making his way down the mountain with Lu Tai. Last night, Qian Pingyan had still been worried that Lu Tai would draw trouble due to spending such huge sums of money in the sky-calling street. When traveling around the world, it was best that one didn't flaunt their wealth. However, nothing untoward happened even after they traveled more than 300 kilometers north. Only then was Qian Pingyan's mind put at ease. Following the occasional reminders from the sword on his back, Qian Pingyan corrected their direction several times, heading toward the general location of his destination. This was necessary because they needed to take detours around mountains and rivers. At the same time, Qian Pingyan also wanted to avoid bustling official roads. Lu Tai had no objections. However, he would stop for a while whenever they came across lively markets, inns and shops in the towns. As repayment for Lu Tai's lack of complaints regarding his choice of direction, Qian Pingyan didn't refuse the handsome young man's requests. This was a very calm and unremarkable journey for Qian Pingyan. Nothing much happened, and he would simply practice fist techniques and sword techniques in the quiet and unpopulated mountains, forests and rivers. He never saw Lu Tai cultivating much, and Lu Tai would only seem spirited when they arrived at lively markets bustling with people and activity. He would appear exuberant as if they had entered a blessed land. As time went on, Lu Tai eventually taught Qian Pingyan one thing. He taught the young boy the lifestyle and standards of a wealthy person. Lu Tai always managed to spend the least amount of money necessary to eat and drink the best food. Even if it were a simple dish, he could enjoy it as if there were thousands of years of history and culture behind it. He could somehow relate the dish to several renowned literati and sages. He could recite several lines of beautiful poetry for each pot of wine. When Lu Tai occasionally purchased an ancient book from some bookstore, he would sit there and hold the book in one hand while lazily flipping the pages with his other. In Qian Pingyan's eyes, however, he felt was the aura and disposition that scholars should possess. When they stayed at inns, Lu Tai would brew himself a pot of tea almost every single day. However, he would never invite Qian Pingyan over to enjoy the tea with him, and he would instead sit alone and quietly sip tea, not saying a single word. He would appear calm and relaxed, filled with an aura of rightness and morality. When Lu Tai played out games of Go from the manuals, Qian Pingyan felt like he had only witnessed this kind of elegant demeanor from Cui Dongshan before. Lu Tai also owned a bamboo flute that sounded especially pleasant to the ear when it was played in the mountains and rivers. Even when he sat lazily in some random place to gaze up at the moon with a folding fan in his hand, he still appeared as graceful as always. Qian Pingyan knew of a term called cultural artiness. This was a very derogatory term. However, Lu Tai wasn't guilty of this. Just like how Qian Pingyan was a country bumpkin at his core, Lu Tai was an innately graceful person. He was an innate scholar. Having money implied wealth, while understanding etiquette implied nobleness. This was the true meaning of being a wealthy noble. Qian Pingyan couldn't learn and emulate Fan Er's brilliant and positive mindset. He felt like he couldn't learn and emulate Lu Tai's graceful and carefree demeanor either. On this day, Qian Pingyan stood atop a tall tree and gazed into the distance. To his surprise, he saw a castle standing amid the majestic yet sparsely populated mountains. Before this, Qian Pingyan and Lu Tai hadn't come across a single mountain or water spirit during their journey. This place was already hundreds of kilometers from Planchette Writing Sect, the most powerful sect in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent. Chen Ping'an initially didn't want to tell Lu Tai that there was a castle in the distance. He wanted to focus on traveling to their destination. However, the handsome young man who had been uninterested in the mountains and waters this entire suddenly decided to jump onto a tall branch today. He rocked his folding bamboo fan and chuckled. Very good, very good. It's a brilliant location to kill people and steal goods before fabricating evidence and framing someone else. Chen Ping'an didn't understand Lu Tai's words right away. However, it wasn't long before he came to a realization. There were skulking figures in the surrounding forest, with their small movements giving rise to quiet rustles. Even though they were well hidden and extremely careful, Chen Ping'an's eyesight and hearing were even better. He immediately discovered that he and Lu Tai were surrounded. Chen Ping'an looked around and said slowly, I'm at the 4th tier of martial arts, and I own 2 bonded flying swords and many immortal talismans. As if in tacit understanding, Lu Tai smiled faintly and said, I'm a chi refiner at the 8th tier, the Dragon Gate tier. And what a coincidence! I also have 2 bonded flying swords and many immortal treasures. There was one person wearing a white robe with a sword strapped to his back. Hanging on his waist was a sword nurturing gourd that hadn't been removed and used as a wine gourd for a long time. There was one person wearing an azure robe with a jade pendant hanging by his waist. Noble people wouldn't remove their jade pendant for no reason. Chen Ping'an and Lu Tai were facing a large group of scheming bandits who had tailed them for hundreds of kilometers. Moreover, it was without a doubt that most of them were chi refiners from the mountains. Lu Tai gently rocked his fan and smiled with squinted eyes, asking, Before throwing hands, should we try to speak some reason with them? Chen Ping'an pursed his lips and patted the wine gourd by his waist, not saying anything else in reply. His reasons were all inside the wine gourd.